What's up, everyone? Hope you're having a great day. Normal American Show host robnoerr. Yeah, it's Friday. Woo! Wednesdays are like my Fridays, though, because I do weird scheduling, so I get Wednesday, Thursday, Friday off. So my first day off work's Wednesday. Anywho, it is Friday. Hope everyone's having a great time. Tomorrow I'm doing my Easter with my family. So I spent all day cleaning the house. Wife got food ready. We didn't even have dinner. I had a bag of beef jerky, Jack's Links, for dinner. That's all right. So here's tentatively the plan this evening. One of our viewers, Conservative Carnage, has a friend that wants to debate me. Okay. I'm not quite sure on what, but I believe the message was, let me see, make sure I get this right. For the sake of I will destroy him on every single subject, says Conservative Carnage's Biden supporting friend. Okay. I don't know exactly what he wants to talk about, but tentatively going to happen tonight. We'll stall here for a little bit and see if that happens. If he calls in, like I said, I don't know what the debate will be on, but I'm always up for smacking around some lefty on a Friday night. Sounds good to me. Or we'll chum someone else in. That would be fine too. Otherwise, what we're going to do here, if we don't get anyone in the next 15 minutes, we're going to review the Jordan Peterson Destiny debate. Now, unfortunately, that means I will probably have to ask my Twitch audience to go to YouTube or another platform because I still think it's against terms of service to show any video with Destiny in it since he's banned from Twitch, which is stupid, but I don't make the rules. And so that may be the direction we end up having to go with that. Yeah, it's supposed to. Some dude, some Biden supporter apparently he's gonna call in and wreck me. He's gonna beat me in every topic, every single subject he'll beat me in. Is apparently what this person said. So happy to do it. But people get busy or cowardice. Yeah, I'll still be on Kick. I'll be on Kick, X, YouTube, and Rumble. I'm doing good, Ninja. Yeah, well, YouTube sucks too. So's Twitter. Everything sucks. What can you do? But no, it'll be a good show. If nothing else, we'll just review the... Yeah, I think that's part of the dude's argument. The economy's doing great. Energy production's doing great. I saw the numbers came out today. 292,000 jobs. They always revise the numbers down like 2 or 3 months when it's no longer a headline. And those numbers are going to get more and more blatantly bullshit as we get closer to the election. But even if you accept their numbers at face value, it's like almost no manufacturing jobs. Okay, let's see what this says. Twitch updates suspension evasion policies. Allows streamers to engage with content from banned users without repercussions. Twitch is introduced. All right. All right, then we won't end Twitch. I mean, according to this, I'll bring it up. You guys could look. To me, this says that I would be allowed to do that. So it says on April 4th, Twitch made a significant announcement regarding its suspension evasion. The updated policy grants streamers the freedom to discuss or react to VODs or live streams originating from suspended accounts, reflecting a notable shift. However, it's still important to note certain actions are prohibited. Can't directly host suspended user on stream. Share their content without adding commentary or allowing them to actively participate. Okay. So then we'll go with that then. Yeah, good for you, David. I hope you get in as well. Anyways, these job numbers, even if you take them at face value, like, there's no real, like, jobs for, like, American citizens that are here. It's all foreign born workers that are getting these jobs. And almost all the jobs are government jobs. So who would have thought the government spends billions of dollars to create fake jobs, basically, just more bureaucracy, more people working in the government. And they're like, it's a victory. Look at all the jobs we created. Right, you create all these jobs that are government jobs. Yeah, I'm in. Of course I'm in. Absolutely. Actually, I was going to talk to Andrew about maybe bringing the arena back once a month, like one Saturday night a month or something like that, or Friday night, whatever night would work best for Andrew and the Crucible. But I think I can't do it every week, but once a month would be all right. Give me time to get some guests lined up. But yeah, absolutely. Shit, if it was up to me, I'd debate every night. I get bored coming on here just doing my own thing. Now, you'll notice I'm pumping up tonight. I don't have my Capri Sun, but I do have diet, or I guess zero sugar A&W root beer. Yeah, I gotta say, I don't know what to say. Like, look, I'm all for criticizing people on our own side. I do it all the time, and I do it currently, but, I mean, it just feels like to me, it's like, am I the only person that really thinks that Biden's a piece of shit? That the institutions that are running the show behind Biden are terrible for this country? Because it seems like all the DeSantis supporters and Trump supporters and, the red pill people and, like, all they want to do is fight with each other. What's Steven Crowder up to today? Oh, did you see Steven Crowder and Nutgate Jared? Oh, Candace and Ben are going at it. That's great. Awesome. Sounds fucking great. Couldn't put it aside until after the election, but whatever. They can do what they're going to do. I'm going to focus on trying to win this election, so good luck to them. Yes, I am streaming on YouTube. Tarnal Westernberg Queefus the Fourth. Very prestigious. Sounds like a land title. Is that one of those ones you could buy from where was that scam that was going on? Lordship in Scotland or whatever. Yeah, the job number's total joke, though. All right, we're just going to jump in. We're going to assume this dude's not going to call in. Did I see Destiny shouted me out in an interview as his most respected conservative debate opponent? I did not see that. I don't think so. I know it's not a popular opinion amongst my crowd, but I don't have a problem with Destiny as a person. I don't really give a shit about his relationships and things like that. I have my own personal opinion with the best way to have a relationship. I'm married. I waited till I was married to have a child. I'm very happy. That's good for me. Other people's proclivities, as long as they're not forcing it on me, you want to be in an open relationship? Whatever. I don't care. I understand Destiny has done some shitty things I've heard to other people in the past. And certainly Destiny has some shitty debate takes. But he's been cordial to me in my interactions with him. And so and I'm the type of person that I clearly want to see people that are closer to my political affiliations thrive on these online platforms. That's why I like the Crucible. That's why I'm happy that they're doing well. And Andrew specifically. Even if we don't agree on anything, I certainly agree way more with Andrew than I do with Destiny. But even people on the left, one, just because it's the type of person I am, I don't give a shit. I hope I never wish anyone ill that their channel collapses or gets banned. I go through thousands of hours. I've never done that. And also for personal reasons, Destiny's channel getting bigger is beneficial to me if I'm going to come on and debate Destiny. Yeah, I enjoy those debates. Andrew's having a pizza party tomorrow. Unfortunately, I probably won't be calling into his show tomorrow because tomorrow's my Easter with my family. So I'll probably be up hanging out with my family till pretty late in the evening, and then probably have a pretty reasonable cleanup after dinner And after Easter egg hiding. Unfortunately, it looks like we're going to have to hide Easter eggs in the house because it looks like it's going to be sleeting rain here tomorrow. I don't think Mr. Hankster will want to be out in the sleet. Beastalmone, do you know what interview it was? Because I'll check the clip if you have. Who was Destiny being interviewed by when he said that? Yeah, no problem, Pentuple. Anytime, man. Enjoy your show. I don't get to watch a lot because you're usually streaming hours when I'm working or when I'm sleeping. But yeah, I enjoy your show, and I hope I know my audience would as well. What's up, peer review? How you doing? That's true, Wicked Volley. Pizza is better. I actually had pizza for lunch today. True story. We bought a pizza. It was Ninja Turtles pizza because Hank went grocery shopping with us and saw the Ninja Turtles pizza. He was with Grandma today as we were cleaning the house. And college class like 3 days ago, right in the beginning of his stream. Oh, cool. Awesome. Anyways, we ate the Nickelodeon pizza today. While Hank wasn't here, unfortunately. But my wife was watching that crazy documentary. I think it's called Quiet on the Set. Have you guys heard about this? About like all these kids getting abused at Nickelodeon? Oh, okay. Conservative Carnage. He's the one whose acquaintance was going to call in and debate me. Not a friend. Got it. College class like 3 days ago, right at the beginning of his stream. I don't know if I can find that or not. If you have a link to the stream, I'll check it out. But otherwise, I think we're going to jump into reviewing this. Oh, yeah, that 80s Ninja Turtle show was awesome, man. Oh, no problem, Conservative Carnage. No problem at all. Yeah, it was like all that. There was a bunch of shows. Like, the obviously, well, if you haven't heard, then it wouldn't be obvious to you. The worst thing they talk about, there was a show called Drake and Josh, and the actor Drake Bells, I think his name, he was full on as bad as it gets assaulted. Horrific. And then the guy that assaulted him, 41 people in the industry wrote letters at his hearing, at his trial, asking to basically let him off the hook. So imagine that. Imagine you're a child actor and you're assaulted in such a heinous way. And then like all these people in the industry are like, well, he didn't really mean it. And then the dude got 16 months. And then as soon as he got out, Disney hired him to work on another kid's show. Yeah, I am a political streamer. Geschäft. I am. You guys can't see this, but on the right of my screen on OBS, I have it set up with my little chat box. It changes the colors of people's names. And my colorblind ass, when it changes your name to blue, I can't read it there. Thank you, Chicken. Appreciate the follow. It was bad. There's all sorts of stuff on that was bad. It's just so scummy, man. My God, it really... What's up, Aftershock? And I know this is cliche, and maybe people don't care to hear this type of shit, but it really hits different now that I have a kid. Like, I'm not saying I would have heard this before I had a kid and been like, oh, well, no big deal. Of course not. Like, assaulting children is the most heinous crime possible. But when you have a kid and you're just like, damn, I am colorblind a little. I mean, I'm not seeing black and white, but I have trouble seeing shades of blues and greens. Right, like Whoopi running, exactly. That's exactly it. All drinky. Right, you think, what if it was your kid? You know, God. I don't know. I think you have to be insane to let your kid get into, like, the acting game. I mean, I'd say there's a better than not chance that it screws them up when they get into adulthood, right? Yeah, that's what we're going to do. We're going to watch the Jordan Peterson. So, Conservative Carnage, I was stalling a little because Conservative Carnage had an acquaintance that mentioned possibly calling in and debating me this evening. I don't know on what, but he said he would wreck me on every subject. So we were giving that person time to respond, but it looks like they're not going to respond. And so then the backup plan is we're going to review the Jordan Peterson Destiny debate. You hate politics, to be honest? Me too. Which is weird that I'm a political streamer, huh? But it's what I know. So what can you do? Of course government wants people to be divided. All right, let's do this then. Now, full disclosure, I have not seen this debate. I've seen 30-second clips on X here and there. Let's see. I'm going to set the speed to 1.25. If I was watching on my own, I usually watch at 1.5. But sometimes, especially with someone like Destiny or me, it's hard to keep up at that speed. I'm not quite sure what they talk about. I know they talk about vaccines at one point. I don't know. I think Jordan Peterson, 2006, Jordan Peterson was someone I really respected. I think he's got a little crazier since then, but that's okay. I think part of that's because he has a daily show or a weekly show. And when you're out there talking every day, you're going to say stuff. It sort of waters down what you're talking about. They both say things that are going to make me throw chairs. My thoughts on Hassan, he's terrible. Hassan's terrible. He has horrible political views. He's not very intelligent with his politics. And he is a coward that won't debate people that could actually challenge him on his politics. That's my view. Destiny is a streamer that's on the left that we're going to be watching here. He'll at least debate you. And he's competent enough to argue and debate. So even though I disagree with much of his politics, I respect more that he's willing to debate people that disagree, including myself. I'm going to tend to agree with Jordan Peterson's worldview much more than Destiny. So my bias, just so everyone's aware going into this, my bias is going to be to favor Jordan Peterson. However, as someone who participated in policy debate all through college and then judged debates, although I'll never say that my bias won't influence how I view a debate, I do think that I'm better than most at being able to separate my bias and give, hopefully, a more objective take than most people would give. So I haven't watched it. I'm admitting to you that I'll probably favor Jordan Peterson's worldview, but I'll try to be honest when I think he makes a weak point and Destiny makes a good point, the best I can. But it is impossible for me to totally extricate myself from that bias. No, I didn't see Willie Mack do that, but that's funny. So let's do it. Let's hop in. Oh, I'll need my headphones to hear. Let me know if there's any audio issues with hearing them. Hopefully we can. Oh, the other thing is, I don't know if we'll get through the whole thing. I'm going to stop anytime I feel like it and give my commentary. So sometimes to review an hour or a 2-hour debate might take me 5-6 hours. So I don't know how late I plan on streaming, but just so you know, I might be stopping a lot. We shall see. Again, haven't seen this, so I just clicked to where it says intro here, and we're going to start from there. So let's see how it goes.
Hello, everyone. I'm here today talking to Stephen Bunnell, known professionally and online as Destiny. He's an American streamer, debater, and political commentator. He really came to my attention, I would say.
No. I'm not going to make my face any bigger than... Here, I can do this. I'll make it just slightly bigger. Man, that's it. But the whole point's to see them, not me, so... Well, there, one last look at my beautiful fat face. And now it's shrunk back down, so...
As a consequence of the discussion you had with Ben Shapiro and Lex Friedman, and I decided to talk to him, not least because it's not that easy to bring people who are identified, at least to some degree, with the political beliefs on the left into a studio where I can actually have a conversation with them. I've tried that more often than you might think. And it happens now and then, but not very often. So today we talk a lot about, well, the differences between the left and the right and the dangers of political ideology per se and the use of power as opposed to invitation and all sorts of other often heated and contentious issues. And so you're welcome to join us. And I was happy to have the opportunity to do this. So I guess we might as well start by letting the people who don't know who you are get to know who you are with a little bit more precision. So why have you become known and how has that developed?
It's a pretty broad question. I think I started streaming.
All right. So first off, stylistically, yeah, Jordan Peterson, he's got a crazy sense of style. Though you got to give it to Destiny for getting rid of the blue hair. You know, he's going to be more mainstream. He's going to do Lex Friedman. He's going to do Piers Morgan. He's going to do Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro. Yeah. You know, hair a little bushier than than I'm capable of being. I'm balding, but yeah, looks presentable, not obnoxious. So style wise, of course, it's hard to beat Peterson there, but you know, Destiny's jaw, you know, Christ, we might as well I'll just give unfiltered opinions on it. Yeah, Destiny's got the jaw moving a little. I don't know. Could be a biological thing. Could be a medication that he's on. Could be a substance that he's abusing. I don't really give a shit. It's, again, outside of my concern. You know, I sort of have the default position, which is a Christian position, that we're all sinners, that we're all, but specifically all of us that stream. Like Pentuple, I've interacted with, you know, a little bit. I assume Pentuple's a shitty person because I'm a shitty person. I think it takes to be somewhat of a shitty person to be on here. So I think that, you know, certainly some of us are worse than others. I don't think I'm in any danger of any, you know, equine videos popping up on a folder in my computer that you'll see like some other left-wing streamers. I think I'm better than that caliber of person, but you see what I mean. Yeah, so if whatever his proclivities are with facial tics or whatever is irrelevant to me. Anyways, moving on.
Streaming around 15 years ago, when it wasn't really a thing yet. There were a few people that did it. I started early on. I was I guess back then you weren't a professional gamer yet because the game had just started to come out, but there was a game called StarCraft 2, and I streamed myself playing that game. I was a pretty good player. It was pretty entertaining to watch, and then I kind of grew over, I guess maybe the next 7 years.
It's a little nervous. You tell the hand movement a little, and that's okay, by the way. Sometimes I get nervous when I do bigger streams. Believe it or not, the most nervous I ever was, the two activities that I was the most nervous was when I was in band, even though it wasn't something that I really cared about. I mean, I did, don't get me wrong, but I cared way more when I debated than I did band. I was always ridiculously nervous right before a band concert. And I think it was because I didn't have confidence in myself. Like, I was the definition of an average French horn player. But I was like I was first chair my senior year, and I had solos, and I was always like, I'm going to screw this up in front of these 100 people watching. But I never did. I was always okay, you know. But I always got very super nervous. Right, once the concert started, I was fine. The other time was in debate after the debate was over while the judge was deciding. I would get so nervous, I would chew my fingernails to the stub. And to the point where, like, I had a partner once tell me, like, dude, don't do that. It makes you look like you have a lack of confidence. And it wasn't a lack of confidence. Oh, you got the timestamp video? Go ahead, put it up there, Beastleman. We'll check it out right before we dive into this. Why does Destiny's following in orbit build him up to be the leftist white knight? Beastleman, go ahead and put that. We'll look at it. I think it's because he's a pretty good debater, and honestly, he's not as insane as many other lefties, and he's actually willing to go in and debate. And when you're like that and you have a big following, it doesn't even really matter if you win the debate, right? It's like a boxer that's willing to fight. Their audience is going to cheer for them even if they lose the fight. So he's built up like that because, and I don't say this at all as detriment to Destiny. He literally is someone who's willing to debate even small people like me. He debated me. The first time I ever talked to Destiny, I probably had 5 people watching me. So, Beast Simone, I didn't see that link. So if you could repost it, let me know, and we'll check it out. Oh, it won't let you post links. Well, piss. Just post it with without a link. You know what I mean? Like without the .com or whatever, and I'll check it out from there. But we'll start with that. So, you know, I think that's why. Now, listen, Destiny has a lot of opinions that are dog shit, and Destiny says a lot of stuff that's just objectively stupid. But if you stream 8 hours a day, 6-7 days a week, you're gonna say some dumb shit. I say dumb shit once in a while. You can't post a link if you're not a mod. Well, just post it without the .com, and then I'll copy paste. We'll see. Because who knows? Maybe seeing this clip, then I'll be like, oh, I'm cheering for Destiny now. Or post it in Discord, yeah. By the way, let me check and make sure this dude didn't message me. Because I'd still happily debate him here. Okay. Let's try that. I don't know what that's going to bring up. Let's try it. All right. I think this is it. Jeez, what's up with this? That's crazy.
I guess this is like a take on a previous question, but are there people that disagree with respect and as a neighbor?
Are there people that I disagree with ideologically, but I respect?
Yeah, like not necessarily that someone that you're friends with, but like just someone that you're like, okay, I don't agree with these positions, but I respect what they do, and I think that they're doing it in good faith. I think that they are doing it fairly well. I think that they are, have decent intentions, those sorts of things.
That's very, very, very rare. It happens, but well, actually, let me be more precise here. There are people. Everybody has something you can appreciate about them. That's not always true. Most people have things you can appreciate about them. So there are some conservatives that I disagree with, but I can appreciate that at least they can read well, or they can put together coherent arguments, or they seem to be decently intelligent. So like for my world, there's a guy called robnoerr, and I appreciate he will go through a lot of source material and documents. So if I'm debating him, I need to be really well prepared, which I appreciate because it helps me prepare my own arguments. That's one thing. And then on like a more famous level, I guess, Ben Shapiro is a really intelligent guy, and I appreciate his intelligent brain, but Jesus, he's so ideologically captured that it's interesting sometimes seeing how he can contort himself psychologically to defend some of the positions.
Yeah, it's nice of him to say. I do appreciate it. But no, I have similar feelings about Destiny in that, unlike some other right-wing streamers, like, I get it. I get why people dislike him. And here's another thing that happens, right? You have to understand this. A lot of streaming is ego-driven. Not just streaming, obviously. There's other things that could be ego-driven as well. And so there are people that will have a bad interaction on a particular thing that has nothing to do with streaming per se. And because of that bad interaction, it flavors their opinion on everything else the person does. For example, let's say I mute someone or ban someone off my channel's chat or off my X. It doesn't matter if I later make an argument that person would really like. They'll be like, fuck Rob, he banned me from his chat. He's a piece of garbage. And there's a lot of that with Destiny, like where his mods will ban someone, or he'll suggest to ban someone, or he'll, talk shit on someone. I haven't had that. Yeah, I mean, anyone can call in for a debate. Bava? I hope I'm pronouncing that right. If you want to call in a debate, I'd prefer you're someone who disagrees with me as opposed to someone that just agrees. But sure, if you want to call in, that's fine. There was a person that was supposed to call in whose name I don't know, but that was going to call in and wreck me and yada, 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 and haven't heard from them. So we're going to review this debate. But if you have a topic that you want to debate and you want to call in, just let me know here real quick before we jump into this debate review, and we could do that. So, continuing.
Years, just streaming that people would watch.
Streaming on YouTube?
Well, back then, I started on a website called Livestream, then I switched to Ustream, then I switched to a site called Justin TV, and then that turned into Twitch.tv. So after streaming there for like 7 or 8 years, I was a semi-professional StarCraft 2 gamer. That game kind of came and went, but I had a lot of other interests. Around 2016, I started to get more involved into the world of politics. It's kind of a left-leaning figure because of my background in like esports and internet gaming and internet trash talk. I had more of a kind of like a combative attitude, and that was kind of rare for left-leaning people at the time. So it's basically where my early political popularity came from. I think from like 2016 to 2018 was debating right-wing people.
So was there a game-like element to the debating, do you think? And is that part of why that morphing made sense?
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, if you get really reductionist. Everything in life is kind of a game, but that's not very satisfying. I think I grew up like very argumentative. My mom is from Cuba, so my family was like very conservative. And then I grew up like listening to the news all day, listening to my mom's political opinions all day. And then I argued with kids in high school and everything. And I've always been kind of like an argumentative, type A, aggressive personality. So I think that probably lent itself well to the political.
I'll say this. Obviously, I'm not speaking for Destiny or Jordan here, but for me, there is a game-like attitude. There absolutely is. Me getting involved in policy debate in college was specifically because it was a game. I wanted to play football, and Russia, Ukraine, and sexism. Maybe we'll do it another night. But yeah, I would happily talk about that. Anywho, I was going to play football at Clarion University. I went to the first like sort of meeting to possibly join the team, and in that meeting was I'm gonna forget his name now. Let me see. I can't remember his name right now. I'll remember it by the end of the night. But there was a player. I played offensive and defensive line, and there was a player there who was just a mountain of a man, and he actually ended up getting drafted in the NFL. I forget his name. It was not Kurt Angle. I know Kurt Angle as well, but no. And so he played for the Arizona Cardinals. Reggie Wells was his name. And I realized I'm just not big enough. I just am not big enough to play football, even at a small college. I just would have never started. It would have been like a Rudy situation where I could have busted my ass for 4 years and then maybe got to play one kickoff or something like that. But I still had a competitive like itch to scratch. And so I took a debate class and I enjoyed it. And then the final was you could go participate in this debate, and I did that, and that's why I did it. I did it because I liked it, because it was a game, because it was a competition. And there is part of me that still to this day is one of the reasons, because remember, that's true, Reggie Wells ain't got nothing on Kurt Angle, but my number one reason for streaming is my own entertainment. And that's why I love debating more than anything else, because I find it the most entertaining because it's competitive. I like it. Now, it's a little different than the game of debate. The game of debate in college has an official winner, loser, rules. Doing this, it doesn't have that. There's no rules, there's no official winner, but there's still a competitive aspect to it, in my opinion, and that's something that I like. Now, I still tell the truth. Thank you, Splendid. Would love for friends to be part of follower views if you wish. Kindly add me on Discord. Username is Splendid. Thanks, man. We'll see. I rarely use Discord, but thanks for the offer.
Stuff in 2016, yeah.
Was that useful in gaming? That personality?
In some ways, yeah. In some ways, no. I don't know directly for the games itself. I don't know how much it necessarily mattered. But for all the peripheral stuff, in some ways it was really beneficial. I could kind of like cut out my own path, and I could be very unique, and I could kind of be on my own. In some ways, it was very detrimental. I can be very difficult to get along with, and I'm very much kind of like, I want to do this thing, and if you try to tell me what to do, I don't want to have like a sponsor or a team or anybody kind of with a leash on me. So yeah, I guess it worked out.
It's interesting because the temperamental proclivity that you're.
I will say this as well. Again, this isn't even getting into the debate yet, but I find, what's up, Casimir, by the way? We'll see if Casimir agrees with me here. I think that many online lefty debate type people are just doing really shitty Destiny impressions. That's what I think. I think that so many people saw Destiny get success, and whether it be intentionally or unintentionally, they come off trying to sound like him, and they're not as good at it as him. Not everyone. There are people that have their own path, obviously, but I think that there's so much of that. And I thought it was hilarious to watch the left eat their own when Destiny got banned from Twitch, because you could see the glee in some of these people's eyes, like, oh, we'll get his viewers. And that's the difference, right, between me and so many of these people, right? Like imagine, John Burke, who's a friend of mine. Imagine if John Burke gets kicked off of all social media. Do you think there's even a slight part of me that's like, oh, great, I'll tap into his audience? Of course not. Because I value the concepts of free speech, even for lefties that I dislike. And certainly for right-leaning people that I like John Burke. But so many of them, you could tell they were gleeful. And then what happened? Once Destiny left Twitch, how do you think the Twitch politics sphere has grown? Has it been better for the lefties or worse? It's been worse. No one gives a shit. It used to be people would have these panels a dime a dozen and everyone was tuning in. Now no one gives a shit because it's the same old echo chamber over and over. You know? People like Brianna Wu run around and tell people, I won't be on a panel with robnoerr. Okay, go fuck yourself. Enjoy your little echo chamber. I don't give a shit. How's that work? How's that working for you? Good? Is that entertainment? Audience liking that shit? Hearing six lefties sit around and agree with each other? Okie dokie. You know, that's the difference. That's the difference between so many of us on the right. If I lost my channel, like I've said this before, it's the honest truth, right? I feel like I've put a decent amount of work in. I put a decent amount of time into my channel. If tomorrow Aircraft Sparky gets like a call from The Blaze or the Daily Wire, and they're like, hey man, we want to promote your show, and all of a sudden there's 5,000 people a night watching him, I'm going to be like, that's awesome, great, fantastic. But I think that there's so many people, and then I'm sure there's those on the right as well that are sort of petty and in it for their own shit more than anything else. Where everybody's in it for their own self to some degree. But that sort of vindictiveness, it's so overwhelming on the left with these people that are in these streaming platforms. They just can't wait to eat their own. It's ridiculous. There is not a doubt in my mind that if I have a private conversation with Casimir or with Aircraft Sparky or with Aftershock or a litany of other people on the right, that it's never going to get made public. But anytime I'm any like Discord group, a debate panel where there's lefties there, I assume all of it will be made public. It's fine by me. I never say anything in those private chats that I wouldn't say publicly anyways. So, all right, moving on.
You're describing, that's associated with low agreeableness. And generally, well, and that's more combative, it's more stubborn, it's more implacable, it's more competitive. The downside is that it's more skeptical, it can be more cynical, it can be less cooperative. But generally, a temperament like that is not associated with political belief on the left, because the leftists tend to be characterized by higher levels of compassion, and that's low agreeableness. So, that element of your temperament at least is quite masculine, and a lot of the ideology that characterizes the modern left has a much more temperamentally feminine nature. So
I mean, I'm not a psychologist, so I don't speak the language that Jordan's speaking here, really. But I think that you could see that with Destiny versus other lefties. For example, you could agree or disagree with Destiny's position on this, but Destiny being pro-Israel, right? That seems to put him at odds with many on the left that are always focused on who they deem as the oppressed, which I think Jordan would say comes from a temperament of high compassion. Make no mistake, that doesn't mean you're a better person or you're even a good person. But I think that you could see that there are, or Destiny defending Kyle Rittenhouse. Destiny's doesn't seem to be of the mold of the lefty that's like the uber communist compassion lefty type. To me, Destiny, if I had to mark what I think, thank you so much, Drew Dogman, for the super chat. Says, cheers, Roberto. Destiny dodges a lot in this. We'll see. Yeah. To me, I would label Destiny more of a institutionalist Democrat, more along the lines of a Barack Obama type supporter, one that will pay lip service to many of the causes of the left, but ultimately is someone who's preeminently interested in defending the institutions that help prop up our government and particularly left-wing institutions. That's how I look at it. That's why I'm at odds with Destiny so much, because the core nature of my belief is to be skeptical of the very institutions that Destiny wants to prop up as being the institutions that we have to have imminent trust in. So we're almost diametrically opposed, but that defense of the institutions will mean that he'll come into conflict with lefties that might say things like defund all the police, which Jordan's talking about. That would be sort of the characteristic of the modern day left, of this compassion characteristic. Yeah, Drew Dugman, that's another way to put it. To support the institutional narrative. Right. Okay.
All right, so why do you think the shift from your popularity to political commentary worked? And You said that started about 2016. And why do you think that shift happened for you, like in terms of your interest?
I think I've always been interested in a lot of things. Like I grew up with a very strong political bend. It was conservative until I got into my streaming years, probably 5 or 6 years into streaming. I slowly kind of started to shift to the left. I would say that, I guess in around 2016, when I saw all of the conversations going on with the election and when all the issues being talked about, I felt like conversations were very low quality. And in my naivety, I thought that maybe I could come in and boost the quality, at least in like my little corner of the internet, to have better conversations about what was going on. And so that was basically my injection point into all of that was, fighting about those political issues and then arguing with people about them, doing research and reading and all of that. Yeah.
And
So to answer Peterson's question specifically, why did he have a rise in popularity? I think some of it's legitimately because of who Destiny is. Regardless if you like him or not, if you're someone who tends to share his political beliefs, and most of the people that were watching video game streaming content are going to be younger and probably tend to be more left-leaning, Destiny's going to come off as someone who advocates for your positions more competently than most of the people that you see doing so on the left. So, and even if you hate Destiny's political beliefs, what you can't argue with is there are a load of people that find him informative and entertaining. It might not be your cup of tea, totally fine. But I have maybe 100 people watching me. Destiny streaming tonight was going to have 10,000. And not all of that's just because the algorithm favors him. There is something about him that draws eyeballs to him and people that like him that are on that side. However, the other reason that Destiny got big, particularly in 2016, is because there was an institutional shift where you had these institutions, particularly institutions that pay lip service to the causes of the left, that understood, like Mike Benz talks about, that there were these internet spaces where you had these right-wing or conservative people that were popping up, and you sort of had this meme ideology that was very much successful in attacking the causes of the institutional left. Trump would have been at the forefront of that. And so you had people like Sargon of Akkad or Milo Yiannopoulos or Gavin McInnes or the people at Rebel News, and many, many more that all of a sudden were organically getting very big on platforms like YouTube. And along with the suppression of many of those voices, which came about not just from the corporations that control YouTube, but also in tandem with government suggestion or strict enforcement, to sort of lower those people's influence, you also had a non-organic rise in sort of the counter to that of people that are on the left. And I do think Destiny is one of those people. Now, this isn't me saying, if the only reason anybody ever watched Destiny is because the algorithm manipulated it that. I'm not saying that. I'm not at all. I'm saying that there were a lot of people, including people in positions of power in corporations and in government, but also just a lot of other people that saw the success of sort of the right-wing versions of Destiny prior to 2016, who had a vested interest in making sure there were left-wing people on these spaces to counter it. That's what my belief is. And so I think that although I will not deny, why Destiny instead of a dime a dozen other people? Because Destiny was more talented than them. He was more entertaining. He was more knowledgeable. He was better at debating than them. That's why there's so many clones of him. Right? But if me and Destiny were equally talented and shared opposing viewpoints and both started to politics stream in 2016, who do you think would have ended up bigger? No doubt him. I got community strikes all the time from YouTube. I get videos removed all the time. I get shadow banned from all these social media places. I get demonetized. And it doesn't matter how effective you are if people can't see you. It's very difficult. If the algorithm decides we're not going to show you to anyone, you could have the most entertaining, informative videos out there, live streams out there, and no one will see them. So
did you do that by video to begin with as well?
Yeah, it was all streaming, yeah.
It was all streaming. And so I presume you built an audience among the people who were following you as a gamer first, and then that started to expand. Is that correct?
Basically, yeah. Without getting too much into like the business or streaming side of things, basically, actually this probably carries over to basically to all media, I would imagine, is you've got people that will watch you for special events. So maybe you're like a commentator of the Super Bowl, or maybe you're hosting like a really huge event. Then you've got people who will watch you every time you're participating in your area of expertise. So for me, that's like a particular game I might be playing. It might be when you're on like a particular show or something that people watch you for. And then the fundamental fan, like the best fan that you're converting to the lowest and most loyal
Has there been anything that a leftist has brought up to me that's made me change my mind or reconsider at least? Of course, all the time, right? So, for example, treatment of prisoners is an issue that I would consider sort of a left-wing issue that I tend to lean more left. I think that our prisons are deplorable. I think we have both an over-incarceration and an under-incarceration problem. I think people on the left have made compelling arguments to me on excessive police force that's occurred in many situations, and that predominantly comes from people on the left, though not exclusively. Like, you could say my libertarian friends probably make a more articulate case for the abuse of police force than the lefties I know. But yeah, there's been times. Absolutely. Do I think Destiny leans left because it's more popular? Kind of when he called January 6th a bunch of frat boys until he changed his mind to MAGA insurrectionists. I think that that's part of it. I think that, but I do think the core of what Destiny believes is what he believes. I think that he thinks Orange Man bad, and that's where most of his political opinions at this point come from. But yeah, I do think there is a part of it that also leans that way because it becomes the more popular opinion. Like, I don't know how you could, in the days after January 6th, say, dude, this wasn't an insurrection. If they wanted to start some shit, clearly they had the numbers to do so, to now claiming it's clearly an insurrection and Trump needs to be in jail and all of this. Yeah, Zudum, thank you. Yeah, I don't agree with that. I wouldn't say everything everyone says on the left is incorrect. And again, I'm not the most right-wing person. That's the other thing. I have knockdown, drag-out debates with Christian nationalists on things like gay marriage, or with white nationalists like Richard Spencer. I've debated. Yeah, I would love to. I've always wanted to do a video with Sean, Actual Justice Warrior. I bet I could hook that up. I think he's on Tim Pool tonight. Actual Justice Warrior. I like him. So let's keep going.
Viewer, I guess, is somebody that's watching you basically no matter what you're doing. And these are the people that will follow you from area to area. Right. And I think because of the way I did gaming and I talked about a lot of other stuff, whether it was politics, science, current events, whatever, I had a lot of loyal fans that kind of followed me wherever I went. So quite a few of them stuck with
established a reputation.
Yeah.
So how would you characterize your reach now? How would you quantify it?
I think can you be more precise?
How many people are watching a typical video that you might produce, and what are you doing for subscribers, say on YouTube, and total? Any idea about total reach?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess my subscribers on YouTube, I have around, I think that's around 770,000 on my main channel. I think I probably do between all three channels, I think around 15 to 20 million views a month. And then I live stream to anywhere from 5 to 15,000 concurrent viewers a day for hopefully around 8 hours a day. Yeah.
Okay. So you have quite a substantial reach. And so you said that initially you were more conservative leaning, but that changed. What did it mean that you were more conservative leaning, and how and why did that change?
When I said I was conservative leaning, I mean, I was writing articles for my school newspaper defending George Bush and the Iraq War. I was like very much like, I think it's like an insult now when people say like neocon, but I was like very much like a conservative, a Bush era conservative. So supported big business, supported traditional, all of the conservative, I guess, like foreign policy, hawkish foreign policy, for whatever that meant. It was like a 14, 15.
The irony to this is I don't think Destiny's changed. Today's Democratic Party is indistinguishable from George Bush. Right? The neocons are the Democratic Party at this point. Defended institutions, defended corporations. Right. Establishment shill. Just like I said before I haven't heard this debate, but I said when Peterson says, well, you're compassion, left wing, he's talking about the super straight up, like super progressive, commie, Bernie bro type people. And Destiny's not that. Destiny's, what did I say? He's more of an institutionalist. If Shapiro and Candace, I don't know. Maybe I'll review that debate. I'm so fucking tired of the infighting on the right now. Like I talked about it at the beginning of this. It's mind-blowing to me. Am I the only person that views another Democrat win as like sort of hurling our country into a disastrous place? Am I the only person that sees that? I don't know. It just, for me, it's like, sure, instead of focusing on sort of the corruption of the Biden administration, I guess we could focus on the conflict between Not Gay Jared and Steven Crowder, or Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro. And I'm not saying those issues aren't important, but I don't know. Anyways, moving on.
Year old.
Right.
There was the whole Elian Gonzalez incident that was very big for Cuban Americans, where there was a Cuban boy that tried to come to the United States with several other people and his mother, and they're I guess, crashed or something happened. I think his mom died and some other people died, and there was a huge debate on whether or not to send him back to Cuba, and Clinton ended up sending him back to Cuba, and I know that my mom was super irritated and all that, to say the least. And then once I hit college, I think I supported Ron Paul in 2008. So I was a big Ron Paul libertarian guy in high school. When I went to a Catholic Jesuit high school, and I kind of became atheist in that process. I started reading Ayn Rand. So I was very, 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 very conservative.
But on the libertarian end, it sounds
I would say so. Yeah. Initially on the
that makes more sense in relationship to your temperament.
Sure, maybe. Yeah. Initially it was like Christian conservative, and then it became like libertarian conservative. Without my life kind of took like a wacky path, and then as I started working, I kind of had to drop out of school. I was working, and then I got into streaming. And once I started streaming, I had a son. Basically, around the first year I started streaming. As I started to go through life, and I went from kind of being in this like working poor position to making a lot of money, especially through the lens of my child, I saw how different life was when I had more money versus less. And I guess like the differences between what was available to me and then my child as I made more money. While I was really wealthy versus not as wealthy, it kind of started to change the way that I guess.
So you got more attuned to the consequences of inequality?
Basically, I would say, yeah.
Okay, and so how did that lead you to develop more sympathy for left-leaning ideas, particularly?
I guess my core beliefs have never really changed, but I think the way that those become applied kind of change. So much the same way that you might think that everybody deserves a shot to go to school and have an education, that might be like a core belief where as a libertarian or conservative, I might think that as long as a school is available, everybody's got the opportunity to go and study. But maybe now as like a liberal.
So let me say something that's going on here now. You notice how this is an interview up to this point. There's not a lot of disagreements. It's Jordan Peterson acting as a person conducting an interview, and then Destiny sort of explaining his life and how he came to the political position, which is totally fine. Don't get me wrong. One of the things I found is that can be disarming. If you're the person being interviewed, it can be disarming to then switch to like a debate, right? And the reason is you're in a different frame of mind when you're being interviewed. Like, how did you get your job? Can you tell me about that? Blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden, why should your job be funded? It requires sort of a change in sort of, I don't want to say strategy, but it's a change in your temperament almost in how you're going. So it's interesting because I know there's going to be some discussion of vaccines and things like that later. So it's interesting to see how we get there, because right now it's clearly just Jordan Peterson, almost as if he was his psychologist. Well, how did you get the beliefs you have today? It's very much like that. Like Jordan Peterson's asking questions and giving a little input. Well, maybe it's that he's socially awkward, but I don't think we should discount that right now it is just being interviewed. Like,
or progressive or whatever you'd call me, I might say, okay, well, we need to make sure that there's enough, maybe like food in the household or some kind of funding program to make sure the kid can actually go to school and study, basically. So like the core drive is the same, but I think the applied principle ends up changing a bit based on what you
right. So is your concern essentially something like the observation that if people are bereft enough of substance, let's say, that it's difficult for them to take advantage of equal opportunities, even if they are presented to them, let's say?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
And you have some belief, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have some belief that there is room for state intervention at the level of basic provision to make those opportunities more manifest.
Yeah, to varying degrees, yeah.
Okay. So let's start talking more broadly then on the political side. So how would you characterize the difference in your opinion between the left and the conservative political viewpoints?
On a very, very, very broad level, if there's some like good world that we're all aiming for, I think people on the left seem to think that a collection of taxes from a large population that goes into a government that's able to precisely kind of dole out where that tax money goes. You're basically able to take the problems of society. You're able to scrape off, hopefully, not super significant amount of money from people that can afford to give a lot of money, and then through government programs and redistribution, you target that.
Thanks so much, Casey Gangsta. Kind of need really appreciate it.
Whatever bare minimum to take advantage of opportunities in society. Yeah.
Okay.
And then on the conservative end, I guess a conservative would generally think that why would the government take my money? I think from a community point of view, through churches, through community action, through families, we can better allocate our own dollars to our own friends and family.
Now, of course, this is just talking about sort of economics, of course. But even here, even in this broad view of how Destiny views the left versus the right, you could see that he's an institutionalist, right? He would say, I'm for the left because I think that the government can precisely dole out, or better dole out with precision, people's collected money than people would do for themselves. So even in this, even in his broad generalization of how he views the left and right, you could see that his core belief is going to come down to sort of being a defender of institutions. Me, if I'm asked the same question, my core belief is that of the fundamental role of the government should be to be as limited as possible, to provide certain necessities, but the underarching value of being a citizen of this country is freedom and liberty. Now, I'm not a total ANCAP, because like Casimir here would say, okay, if we believe that, then you should be an ANCAP, which I'm not. I believe there's more of a limited role of government than like an ANCAP would. But ultimately, that's the lens through which I view things. And so when it comes right down to it, this would inform how we would look at certain situations. This is why Destiny would say the government can do vaccine mandates. The government could lock people down, and why I would be opposed to those efforts. Because I believe in individual freedom. He believes in a managed society. And so you can see even then why then he would have a proclivity to defend the very institutions that I think are corrupt. Because he has to defend them.
Family to help them and give them the things that they need so that they can better participate in and thrive in society, basically.
Okay, so one of the things that I've always found a mystery, I mean, I think there's an equal mystery on the left and on the right in this regard, is that the more conservative types tend to be very skeptical of big government, and the leftist types tend to be more skeptical of big corporations. Right? Well, following through the logic that you just laid out, you made the suggestion that one of the things that characterizes people on the left is the belief that government can act as an agent of can and should act as an agent of distribution. Okay, a potential problem for that is the gigantism of the government that does that. Now, the conservatives are skeptical of that gigantism, and likewise, the liberals, the progressives in particular, we'll call them progressives, are skeptical of the reach of gigantic corporations. And I've always seen a commonality in those two, in that both of them are skeptical of gigantism. And so one of the things that I'm concerned about, generally speaking, with regard to the potential for the rise of tyranny is the emergence of giants. And one potential problem with the view that the government can and should act as an agent of redistribution is that there is an incentive put in place, two kinds of incentives. Number one, a major league incentive towards gigantism and tyranny. And number two, an incentive for psychopaths who use compassion to justify their grip on power, to take money and to claim that they're doing good. And I see that happening everywhere now particularly in the name of compassion. And it's one of the things that's made me very skeptical, in particular about the left, and at least about the progressive edge of the left. So I'm curious about what you think about those two. First of all, it's a paradox to me that the conservatives and the leftists face off each other with regard to their concern about different forms of gigantism, and don't seem to notice that the thing that unites them is some antipathy. This is especially true for the libertarians, some antipathy towards gigantic structures per se. And so then I would say, with regards to your antithesis between liberalism and conservatives, the conservatives are pointing to the fact that there are intermediary forms of distribution that can be utilized to solve the social problems that you're describing that don't bring with them the associated problem of gigantism. And like it's been shocking to me to watch the left, especially in the last 6 years, ally itself, for example, with pharmaceutical companies, which was something I'd never thought I would see in my lifetime. I mean, for decades, the only gigantic corporations the left was more skeptical of than the fossil fuel companies were the pharmaceutical companies. And that all seemed to vanish overnight around the COVID time. So I know the story. That's a lot of things to throw at you, but it sort of outlines the territory that we could probably investigate productively.
Yeah, so a couple things. I would say that the current political landscape we have, I think, is less. I understand the concept of conservatives supporting corporations and liberals supporting like large government. I think today the divide we're starting to see more and more is more of like a populist, anti-populist rise, or even like an institutional or anti-institutional rise. So, for instance, I think conservatives today in the United States are largely characterized with, I would say, with populism, in that they're supporting like certain figures, namely right now Donald Trump, who they think alone can kind of like lead them against the corrupt institutions, be them corporate or government. I feel like most conservatives today are not as trustful of big corporations as.
It's true. That's actually true, right? And it's so what Jordan Peterson's saying in a nutshell is what he's saying is like, The left hates big corporations. The right hates big government. But the problem with both of those is these big, unattached from your daily life institutions that are the real people that are making decisions that affect you and your family. The left says we fear corporations doing that. The right says we fear government. And Destiny correctly points out that much of the right now is populist, such as myself. And he says it's institutionalist versus anti-institutionalist. Correct. I don't have trust, for example, of big Facebook or big social media or big corporations. Now, that doesn't mean I want the government to come in and punish them, but my distrust is with them as well. Absolutely, that's true. However, I think it's worse to give the government this power, because when you give the government the power to pick winners and losers in the business world, what you've done is you make the big corporations even more influential, because then they could lobby and pay for the policies that they want and use the government as cover to get the positions that benefit them anyways. It's one of the reasons we could see that with the reaction to COVID and the lockdowns and all of that stuff, the stimulus, it was one of the largest transfers of wealth from the poor and working class to the upper class in the history of this country. The businesses that suffered the most were small businesses. Estimates say that over 50% of small businesses that closed down will never reopen post-COVID and the lockdowns, right? So because this was the socialist dream, right? This was managed economy to the 10th degree. Not only will we massively send people stimulus money and massively send out these checks, which is what the socialists want. It's what Destiny talked about, distribution of wealth. But we'll even go further. We'll manage how people could travel. We'll manage how they could shop. We'll manage how they could go to work. And what was the result? Well, the left spent years telling us if the more we get to that, the better it will be. The more distributive the government will be, and it will benefit people on the lower end of the economic stack. It did the exact opposite. The exact opposite. Walmart thrived. Big businesses thrived. Your local hardware store closed. Home Depot and Lowe's did great. I define populism. When I say I'm a populist, what I mean is I want a government that works predominantly and is held accountable to the people that elected it. Populism to me is defined by its antithesis, which is institutionalism. I believe that these institutions are corrupt and unaccountable and do not have the interest of the people that they claim to be their constituents. All right, let's keep going.
They were back in like the Bush era, where we would, conservatives would champion, big corporations.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
That's a strange thing, because it makes the modern conservatives a lot more like the 60s leftists.
Potentially, yeah.
I mean, that brings us into the issue, too, of whether the left-right divide is actually a reasonable way of construing the current political landscape
Correct.
at all. And I'm not sure it is, but...
Right now, it kind of is, but only because so many conservatives are following Trump. So like your populist, anti-populist thing kind of maps on kind of cleanly to the left and right. It doesn't work with progressives, though, or the far left, because they're also anti-large everything. So in a surprising way, on very, very far left people, you might find them having a bit more in common with kind of like a MAGA Trump supporter than like a center-left liberal. So for instance, like both of these groups of people on the very far left will be very dovish on foreign policy, probably a little...
To be clear, Zuzadim, if you followed me during the Trump presidency, you would know that I was vehemently against Trump's actions during COVID for the opposite reason that most of the left was. I thought it was because he was giving in to the left too much, to the ideas of the left, lockdowns, stimulus. Now, there's an argument to be made that the stimulus actually was necessary, right, in a horrible way. Like if the government, like take COVID out of it, if the government comes, let's say Zudum, you own a small business, and for no reason whatsoever, the government kicks in your doors tomorrow. It's like, you're shut down and you're not allowed to work anywhere else. And 3 months go by and you can't afford to feed your children. Maybe then, as your neighbor, I'd be like, well, shit, I don't know what's going on, why you're being shut down. But they ought to give you some money or something so you can feed your family while they're forcing you to not be able to work. So I'm not saying the Trump stimulus was fire, though. And one of the things that separates me from a lot of Trump sycophants, where did the Tea Party go during the Trump presidency? All they did rightfully was argue about the massive spending Obama did. Yet I didn't hear them much when Trump was spending at an even faster clip. Now Biden, of course, has dwarfed that. But nonetheless, if we're going to be logically consistent and be fans of small government, How could you not criticize Trump's spending? So, Zudum, I don't know how well you know me, but it's not an accurate representation if you're sort of being tongue-in-cheek saying, oh, but Rob, the Trump stimulus was fire, though. No, that wasn't my take at all. In fact, I was offered a small job by Trump's campaign to sort of run the county I'm in here in Pennsylvania, and I turned it down because I couldn't have social media, and that was part of the condition of the job. And within a week of that, Trump came out with this bullshit calling for lockdowns and stuff. I called him out over and over again. Said it was going to cost him the election. Said it was going to devastate the economy. I was right about all of it. But continuing.
A little bit more isolationist. They're not a big fan of like a ton of immigration or a ton of trade with other countries. They might think that there's a lot of institutional capture of both government and corporations. So both all of the MAGA supporters and the far, far left might think that corporations don't have our best interest at heart and the government is corrupt and captured by lobbyists. You'll see a lot of overlap there.
Right.
I think that sometimes there's a couple things. One, this is something I feel like I've discovered. People have no principles. I think that people are largely guided by whatever is kind of satisfying them or making them feel good at the time. I think that's a really important thing to understand because people's beliefs will seem to change at random. If you're trying to imagine that a belief is coming from some underlying principle or is governed by some internal, like moral or a reasonable code or whatever, I think generally there are large social groups and people kind of follow them along from thing to thing, which is why you end up in strange worlds sometimes where, like the position on vaccines and being an anti-vaxxer might have been.
But this is the exact criticism I would make to Destiny, right? Like, how many times has Destiny and people like him on the left criticized something Trump did, and then when Biden does something similar, they're okay with it? For example, Destiny, if we take logical extensions of my conversations we've had with him, when I talked to him in 2020, before January 6th, about the George Floyd riots, he said rioting was the other side of the coin to voting. And he actually said the only problem he really had with the riots was that it was targeting private businesses. And so it would be a more legitimate if these people had beef with policing and government. If they were just attacking policing and government institutions, that would be a more legitimate form of protest. And yet he spent, since 2021, hyper-focused on January 6th. Even though initially, as Aftershock says, initially he said after January 6th it wasn't an insurrection. But once he saw that's where the group that he votes with was going, that they were going to fundamentally base their entire strategy of censorship, intimidation, political gamesmanship off of saying that January 6th was this seminal moment in our country that was an insurrection, that's the direction he went. Now compare that. Now I'm not saying he's wrong that there aren't people that do that on the right as well, but it's interesting to see him make a criticism or to say this as a criticism where he himself's been captured by it. Where was that with me? Where have I done that? And it's ironic because this is the accusation I get all the time. Well, Rob just defends everything Trump does. And so he'll always be against anything being done to Trump and be for anything. But when you look, I've been remarkably consistent on almost everything. For example, I did not say Hillary Clinton should have went to jail for her mishandling of classified documents. I did not say Joe Biden should have went. I just said that Trump shouldn't have either. And if we're going to agree to charge him, then we should charge the rest. Same with FARA violations. I didn't think the Podesta group should go to jail for a FARA violation. But if you're going to charge Paul Manafort, then for the exact same crime with the exact same people, then why not someone in the Podesta group? And I've been remarkably consistent on defending people on the left. For example, you wouldn't find someone who defended someone like Kathy Griffin more than me. When everyone was losing their minds over her holding that bloody head, I said, well, it's a joke. If you don't like it, change the channel. You don't have to buy that magazine. It's okay. Well, that's just it, Zudinum. You don't have to defend either. I assume you're pseudo new to the channel, Zudinum. I don't know. I won't show it now because I'm reviewing this debate, but you could ask anyone here that has seen me show this dozens of times before. The day of January 6, 2021 was the due date of my son being born. I was nervous as shit. I knew at any moment I could have to rush my wife to the hospital. And she asked me to go pick up a few groceries. And as I was going to the car, I open up Twitter and I see that there's a riot at the Capitol. And so I did a video as I'm driving to the groceries. I just saw this for like 2 minutes. And I condemned any political violence that was occurring that day. And I said that if I was going to be consistent and I called out the violence from Black Lives Matter, then it would be immoral and inconsistent for me to not call out violence that was occurring with people on the right. Now, I went on to say that I didn't care to hear anyone who said that violence on the left was okay or it was mostly peaceful. I didn't want to hear from them because I'd spent all summer telling them, if you play this game, if you say it's okay or it's not a big deal when the left riots, then the right's going to do it too. And I don't want to hear you say it's a big deal when they do it. So those people could pound sand. But I called it out that day probably faster than any other commentator in the country. Yeah, I know Destiny focuses heavily on the elector scheme, but that still wouldn't make it an insurrection. Well, that's true, Sunflower, but I mean, shit, you could say that about anything. Like, I could theoretically say that about any actor who's ever been in a horror movie. But what if their kids saw zombies eating them? You know, you're a character on The Walking Dead. You know, yeah. But that's life. People do and say offensive things. Okay. I'm okay with it. So anyways, interesting to see Destiny call out, which I would say is something fundamentally that encapsulates not just him, but so much more of the modern day Democrat.
Seen as something, 10 years ago, it's kind of like a hippie leftist, and now maybe it's more like a conservative, or it's associated more with like MAGA Trump supporters or whatever. I think as a result of how the social groups move around.
Do I think January 6 people should be charged? A handful of them. Those that engaged in violence, absolutely. The majority of them didn't. I think they should be given the same punishment that the people that trespassed during the Kavanaugh hearings was given. A small fine. But if you engaged in violence, if you were physically assaulting police officers, sure, you should be charged. The vast majority of the people didn't do that. They walked around inside the Capitol.
When it comes to you mentioned this like gigantism thing. That's another thing where I'm not sure if people actually care about gigantism or if they're using it as a proxy for other things that they don't like. Like, I could totally imagine.
Well, I care about it.
Sure. Yeah, you might. Yeah, sorry. It just in general.
That's
yeah.
Okay.
Because like I could imagine somebody saying that like they don't trust like a large government, they think there's too much, prone to tyranny or something like that, but also be supportive of an institution like the Catholic Church, which is literally, one guy who is a direct line to
but they
God.
can't tax.
Well, I mean,
And they don't have a military.
That
and
is
they can't conscript you.
true.
Right?
Yeah.
And they can't throw you in jail.
That is true. Yeah. I mean,
Right. Well, those are major and significant. I mean, I get the overlap. Don't get me wrong.
sure. But I'm saying like even if you had a local government.
No, I heard that's one of the clips I heard. And Peterson's absolutely right here, right? So there's a different, take Destiny's argument to its logical extension. If you don't like gigantism, which is the word Jordan Peterson's using, basically just when things grow to the point that they're unaccountable to the average everyday person. If you're skeptical of that, then you wouldn't like any institutions like this, right? So let's apply that to other things in life. So let's say I would be a sports fan, and I would be like, well, then I can't like the Yankees because the Yankees spend way more money, or the Los Angeles Angels, or, the Dodgers, whoever's spending the most money this year. I can't like them. Now, truth be told, usually I don't. But if I was born in LA and I was always a Dodgers fan, I'd probably still be a Dodgers fan. That sort of thing, though, is recreational. Religion, although not recreational, is something that is a choice that you could make of people that don't have control over your life. The government or corporations that literally control things like the price you will pay for things, or the jobs that will be shipped overseas, or the ability to censor you, or the ability to throw you in jail, or the ability to tax you. These are all things that you don't have a say in. Right? It's not like, I could choose to shit, I don't even know. I have friends that follow English Premier League. So they used to always pick a team. The team I would always pick knowing jack shit about soccer was Crystal Palace because I knew they were shit and they were an underdog. And they would be picking Manchester United or Manchester City, which I think are the bigger teams, right? That was me choosing who to like. That was my friends choosing who to like. You don't get to be like, I think the federal government's too big. I believe I won't support them anymore. I'm not going to pay taxes. I'm not going to acknowledge when they come to arrest me. Nope. Well, of course, you can't like the Yankees if you're not. By the way, and usually what happens is, if you're not a fan of one of the big teams, if you're a fan of a different team, then you hate those big teams. So as a Pittsburgh Pirates fan who never spent any money, to hell with those teams spending all the money. So I don't take Destiny's point here. It's totally not analogous. And Jordan Peterson handles it very quickly. I think it's very smart for him to handle it in that way. Taxation is theft. In general, most taxation is basically a form of theft, yes. But it's a form that I'm accepting as long as it's as limited as possible. So I think that there is a role for the government to have a military. I think in order to have that military, they need to have some form of taxation. I think that there should be police. I think in order to fund the police, there should be some form of taxation. How far are we into this? Well, 20 minutes. We're never going to get through it tonight. I've been streaming an hour and 18 minutes, and we're 20 minutes into the debate. Let's keep going.
Like a local, like if you had a state government or a tribe, usually they've got some form of enacting punishment. It'll be sometimes more brutal, but they can throw you in jail. Conscription hasn't existed in the U.S.
Well, the idea that the Catholic Church is involved in politics or whatever, well, that could be true, but it's still something that you could choose to support or not. So, for example, the small government person like me would say, yes, any organization, church, entity, country, whatever, insert whatever institution you want that has an undue influence on our government through the power of moneying because they're large, etc., absolutely is something that I'm critical of. Sure.
Since the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, true. Yes.
Yeah, true.
So yeah, I think that I guess when I look at
Let's go back. Let's go back to
sure.
to the redistribution issue. I mean, we pay 65% of our income at, say, upper middle class to upper middle class level in Canada. It isn't obvious to me at all that that money is well used. In fact, quite the contrary. In my country now, our citizens make 60%. They produce 60% of what you produce in the U.S. That's plummeted over the last 20 years as state intervention has increased. I'm not convinced that the claim that the interests of people who lack opportunity are best served by state intervention. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I mean, first of all, I'm aware of the relationship between inequality and social problem. There's a very well-developed literature on that, and it essentially shows that the more arbitrary, the broader the reach of inequality in a political institution of any given size, the more social unrest. So where all people are poor, there isn't much social unrest, and where all people are rich, there isn't much social unrest. But when there's a big gap between the two, there's plenty, and that's mostly driven by disaffected young men who aren't very happy that they can't climb the hierarchy. There are barriers in their way, and so there is reason to ameliorate relative poverty. The problem with that, to some degree, is that most attempts to ameliorate relative poverty tend to increase absolute poverty, and they do it dramatically. And the only solution that we've ever been able to develop to that is something approximating a free market system. I wouldn't call it a capitalist system because I think that's capture of the terminology by the radical leftists. It's a free exchange system. And the price you pay for a free exchange system is you still have inequality, but the advantage you gain is that the absolute levels of privation plummet. And I think the data on that they're absolutely conclusive, and that's been especially demonstrated in the radical decrease in rates of poverty since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989. Because we've lifted more people out of poverty in the last 4 decades than we had in the entire course of human history up to that date. And that's not least because the statist interventionist types who argued for a radical state-sponsored redistribution lost the Cold War, right? And that freed up Africa to some degree, and certainly the Southeast Asian countries, to pursue something like a free trade economy. And that instantly made them rich, even China. So that's an argument, let's say, on the side of free exchange. But it's also an argument, a twofold argument, pointing out how we ameliorate absolute poverty, which should be a concern for leftists, but doesn't seem to be anymore, by the way. And also an argument for the maintenance of a necessary inequality. Like, I'm not sure that inequality can be decreased beyond a certain degree without that decrease causing other serious problems. And we can talk about that, but it's a complicated problem.
Yeah, for one point of clarification, when you say leftist, what do you mean by that?
Well, I was going with your definition, like essentially the core idea being something like the central problem being one of relative inequality and distribution of resources, and the central solution to that being something like state-sponsored economic intervention. I mean, there's other ways we could define left or right, and we can do that, but I'll stick with the one that you brought forward to begin with.
Gotcha. Okay. I only want to be clear on that because people get mad if I call myself a leftist. Oftentimes online or especially in
Now, the argument that Destiny could make here is, I don't know what he's going to say, but yeah, it's Milton Friedman. This is an argument that Milton Friedman makes, one I agree with. And I think Peterson's making it sufficiently here. And the argument is basically, we should try to eliminate wealth inequality. That is absolutely something that causes problems. So let's say that we just put a number. Let's say 0 would be population in abject poverty, starving to death, literally can't eat, right? And 10 would be extravagant wealth beyond, imagination, right? And let's say that we have a society that is made up of 4s and 9s. There's going to be a lot of social unrest there because of that gap. Even though 4 is people, they can afford to eat, they can afford to rent. Maybe they all can't afford homes. Some can, some can't, right? And 9s are insanely wealthy Bill Gates type peoples, right? And your society, so there's going to be unrest there. If we could make everyone a 3, that might eliminate that unrest. But would it be something that we should be striving for? And so what Peterson says is, that should be a goal that we should be focused on, the absolute levels of poverty, right? So wouldn't we rather have a society of 4s and 9s than a society of everyone 3s, is what he's saying. And he's saying it seems like the best way to lift people out of abject poverty, absolute poverty, is free markets, right? That's what he seems to be suggesting. And he says the example of that is when we had the big socialist countries like the Soviet Union, since they've collapsed and we've had more of a free market central economies, we've lifted more people out of poverty in the world than we had in the entirety of human history. If I'm Destiny, and I want to argue his point here, what I would say is, but you're only looking at that in terms of absolutes. So you're assuming absolute free market economies versus absolute redistributive economies. But there's a middle ground. Right? So, for example, the Scandinavian countries have seemed to have done quite well, but they're more leftist or socialist than, say, countries that you would describe maybe in Southeast Asia. Yet they're doing better with absolute poverty as well, even though they have more redistributive policies. And so it seems like you could be right that there is some metric of free trade needed or free markets needed, but once that base metric is made, then it's actually more beneficial to be more redistributive. Now, I don't agree with that. I think that what you end up seeing is many of these countries that have high redistributive rates that we say are successful, such as the Scandinavian countries, only got so because they had natural resources and free markets that propelled the entire country to huge areas of wealth. And as they import people that aren't contributing and make their situation more economically diverse, you're going to see the absolute levels of poverty start to increase again. Just like they would have had they never had the free markets. But that's where I would expect the debate to go here. We'll see what Destiny says.
Europe or worldwide, leftists will refer exclusively to like socialists or communists, and anybody to the right of that would be considered like a liberal. If you
No,
would, like,
usually a fascist.
Well, depending on
Very rapidly.
Yeah. I just wanted to be clear on that. So I'm absolutely a pro-capitalist, pro-free market guy. I'm never gonna.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good. It's good to get that clear. Why?
Yeah. Because I would argue that when you look at like the fall of the Soviet Union, or you look at the failure of like socialist or communist regimes, I don't know if the issue there was so much redistribution. I think the problem.
That was one of many issues.
I don't think it was an issue at all. Actually, I would say I think the issue was command.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. What
Mm-hmm.
do you mean redistribution wasn't an issue? What the hell do you think they did to the kulaks? That was forced redistribution. It resulted in the death of 6 million people. So maybe I'm not understanding what you mean, but that was redistribution at its like pinnacle.
Sure.
And forced redistribution. And it was brutal.
When I think of the strengths of capitalism, the ability for markets to dynamically respond to shifting consumer demand is like the reason why capitalism and free market economies dominate the world. When you've got socialist or communist systems, command economies, where a government is trying to say, this is how much this is going to cost, this is how much you're going to produce and make. There's a failed way of managing a state economy. Even in places where they still do it, there are always shadow economies and stuff. There were in the Soviet Union that prop up where people try to basically ameliorate the conditions that are resulting from said horrible command economy practices. So I guess in a way you could argue a command economy is kind of...
Okay. Destiny's not wrong here in what he says is that the command economy, if you want to say that that's not what you consider redistributive and you think that's a separate issue, fair enough. What he is articulating here is an issue, but it ignores the point that Jordan Peterson made, which are the fundamental mechanism that they used was wealth redistribution. That you weren't entitled to your private property. They could come in and take it and give it to people they thought were more deserving. And he points to the Holodomor, which elimination of the kulaks, which led to 6 million people starving to death. And that's exactly what the problem was there. And there's all sorts of problems that you see that came, through these redistributive efforts, what you did was you took sort of the specialization that goes with free markets and makes free markets so successful. which is sort of what Destiny's explaining here, right? The idea that when you allow people to specialize, they're going to increase their productivity in their area of specialization, and that allows sort of a fluid economy. It allows people to go where the market decides they need to go organically. And you'll never have institutions like a government that's able to dictate where that should be. They'll never be fast enough. They'll never be smart enough. They'll never be fluid enough. People's own desires in a free market are always going to work better than that. But the fundamental reason that they started to do a command-side economy was based on this idea of redistribution, which meant that you took people out of their specialization. So to put it quite simply, the people that were specialized as farmers were no longer the farmers. You now put people that had zero specialization into that area, and they couldn't do it. Now do that with logging, and do that with mining, and do that with textiles, and all other areas of production. And that's why net productivity dropped immensely. What happened? Am I lagging? Buffering? I just talked to the internet guy today. I'm supposed to get new internet. But let's see what Destiny says.
Kind of like redistribution, it's a form of it, but
No, it's a worse problem. If you're pointing to the fact that that's a worse problem, I'm
yeah,
with you
I would say that's
100%.
definitely the reason why these places failed, because they just weren't able to respond to changing
Okay, so
conditions.
what's the difference between
Going online without
What is this
ExpressVPN is
crap?
like leaving your kids with the nearest stranger while you go
We're
to the
gonna let it play.
restroom. They're probably not a kidnapper or a serial killer, but why would you ever take that risk? Every time you connect to an unencrypted network in cafes, hotels, or airports, you leave your data vulnerable. Any hacker on the same network can steal your personal data, such as your passwords and financial details. It doesn't take much technical knowledge to hack someone. Hackers can make up to $1,000 per person selling personal info on the dark web. ExpressVPN creates a secure, encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet, so that hackers can't steal.
I don't like to skip when people have ads. I think it's generous enough that they're letting me watch their material and comment on it. So I usually like to let the ads.
Your sensitive data. It'd take a hacker with a supercomputer over 1 billion years to get past ExpressVPN's encryption. I love how easy ExpressVPN is to use. You just fire up the app and click one button to get protected. Plus, it works on all devices, phones, laptops, tablets, and more, so you can stay secure on the go. Secure your online data today by visiting expressvpn.com/Jordan, expressvpn.com/Jordan, and you can get an extra 3 months free. That's expressvpn.com/Jordan.
Okay, so what's the difference between a state that attempts to redistribute to foster equality of opportunity and a command economy? Is it a difference of degree?
Maybe
Like,
so.
are you looking
It's
at
up.
models, let's say, like the Scandinavian countries? Or I wouldn't use Canada, by the way, because Canada is now, what would you call it?
Thank you so much. Sudam Super Chat for $5 says, I would definitely be interested to hear your take on Andrew X. Sisla guy who's been going around. He showed up on Andrew Schultz, ex-CIA. I have no idea who that is. I can't comment. Send me a link or something. I'll check it out at some point, and maybe I'll give you some commentary on it. But yeah, I'm not sure who you're talking about.
predicted by economic analysts to have the worst performing economy for the next 4 decades of all the developed world. So maybe we'll just leave the example of Canada off the table.
Sure.
Scandinavian countries are often the polities that are pointed to by, I would say, by people who, at least in part, are putting forward a view of redistribution for purposes of equality of opportunity like you are. But they're a strange analogy because they're very small countries, and up till now they were very ethnically homogenous.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that makes a big difference when you're trying to flatten out the redistribution. Plus, they're also incredibly wealthy, which makes, redistribution, let's say, a lot easier. So what's why doesn't a government that's bent on redistribution fall prey to the pitfalls of command economy and forced redistribution, for that matter? How do you protect against that?
I think what you have to do is very, very, very difficult. Is people get very ideologically captured by both ends, and they feel very, committed, or they feel very allegiant to pushing certain forms of economic organization. And I think sometimes it blinds them to some of the benefits of what exists when you incorporate kind of multiple models, or you'd call them mixed economies, which is really what every capitalist economy today is. It's some form of free market capitalism combined with some form of government intervention to control for negative externalities. These are the ways that all economies, even in Scandinavia and the world, work. And I think that recognizing the benefits of both systems are the best way to make things work. Yeah.
Fair enough. And the Scandinavian countries seem to have done a pretty good job of that. But like I said, they have a simpler problem to solve, let's say, than the Americans have. Negative externalities.
So far, I have to be honest, this is fine in a broad sort of discussion. I prefer a more specific discussion on areas that they would have disagreement. The interesting thing is, Jordan clearly doesn't know Destiny very well, which is totally understandable, of course, which is why he starts off sort of asking Destiny's positions on things. But a lot of these sort of areas that Jordan's broaching would fit more in with someone who's more socialist than Destiny. But Destiny's going to say he's an institutionalist, right? He's a Hillary Clinton Democrat. Big corporations, yay, right? So a lot of these, it's, you know, Destiny's be like, sure, I'm for free markets. I'm for big corporations. I don't care. You know, so it's, you know.
You know, that's an interesting rabbit hole to wander down, because the problem I have with negative externalities, you made a case already that, and again, correct me if I've got this wrong, but I think that I understood what you said. A free market, free exchange economy is a gigantic distributed computational device.
Basically, yeah.
Right, exactly.
Which, funnily enough, one of the big problems for command economies is called the computation problem, because no central body can actually compute,
yes,
the ins and outs of.
Right, exactly. Right, that's not, yeah, that's a fatal problem, right? Because it doesn't have the computational power. It certainly doesn't have the speed of data recognition. It doesn't have the on-the-ground agents if all of the perception and decision-making is centralized, right? It's way too low resolution. It's going to crash. Okay, so, and I think that that's comprehensible technically as well as ideologically. All right, so, but having said that, with regards to externalities, all the externalities that a market economy can't compute are so complex that they can't be determined centrally by the same argument. And
There
so,
are ways to account for them, though.
really,
that work with.
tell me
Yeah.
how.
So
Because I can't see that, because I can't see how that they can be accounted for without the same computational problem immediately arising.
Yeah, and I understand that. And I think that's a problem sometimes of people very far on the left when they want to deal with certain problems. I think that they want to bring like heavy-handed, like things like price controls in to say, well, we need less of this, so let's just make this cost this particular thing, which ironically enough introduces a whole other set of externalities that will happen when you get a lot of friction between where your price floor or ceiling is set compared to what a market was set at. But ideally, if you're a reasonable person and you view economies as mixed economies, what you try to do is you try to take these externalities, meaning things that aren't accounted for with your primary system. So in a capitalist system, an externality might be something that causes a negative effect, but it doesn't cost you any money. Pollution would be a good example of that. And rather than saying like, well, no company can pollute this much, or, if you're a company, you have to use these things because the other things are making too much pollution, all you do is you say, okay, well, if we've determined that, say, carbon is bad for the atmosphere, well, we're just going to attach a little price to that. The government's going to say that, yeah, if you pollute this much, here's the price. And then if you want to pay for it, you can. But that type of intervention in the economy basically allows the free market to hopefully do its job, because the government has tacked on a little bit of a price thing that tries to account for the cost of that externality. Yeah.
Great. That's a great example. We can go right down that rabbit hole. Carbon. Okay, so first of all, one of the things I've seen, you tell me what you think about this, something that I've seen that actually shocks me, that I was interested in watching over the...
My guess is, and I don't know, I haven't seen this, my guess is Peterson's going to make the point, but the problem is, right, once we allow the government to do that and say they're going to fix these externalities by imposing costs, sort of artificial cost on to incentivize the free market to make the right decisions, is that there's an incentive for certain corporations and for the government to push things in a direction to benefit themselves and their allies based on facts that may not be true. So, for example, we could have Al Gore's carbon trading scheme and everybody feels good about it. Oh, we paid our incentive. We bought our carbon credits and we traded them. We saved the environment. But it's based on a problem that's being massively overblown, and there's no evidence that this carbon trading actually did anything meaningful to have the solution in the first place. So in other words, they artificially create problems and then put cost on them that end up massively affecting people downstream, like your average consumer, and benefiting wealthy corporations that played into the game and lobbied the government for these sorts of efforts. And it ends up, again, siphoning wealth from the poor to the working class. Destiny's perception would only work in a totally competent, benevolent system, where the government is always acting with the people's best interests at heart and they're knowledgeable enough to do so. Otherwise, any mistakes or malevolence they have to enrich themselves will end up being paid by the people on the bottom rung.
The last 5 or 6 years, I wondered what would happen when the left, the progressives, ran into a conundrum. And the conundrum is quite straightforward. If you pursue carbon pricing and you make energy more expensive, then you hurt the poor. And I don't think you just hurt them. In fact, I know you just don't hurt them. I heard a man 2 days ago who's fed 350 million people in the course of his life, heading the UN's largest relief agency, make the claim quite straightforwardly that misappropriation on the part of interventionist governments increased the rate of absolute privation dramatically in the world over the last 4 or 5 years. And that has happened not least because of carbon pricing, not just carbon pricing, but the insistence that carbon per se is an externality that we should control. Now, Germany's paid a radical price for that, for example. So their power is now about 5 times as expensive as it could be. And they pollute more per unit of power than they did 10 years ago before they introduced these policies that were hypothetically there to account for externality. And the externality was carbon dioxide. I don't think that's a computable externality. And I don't think there's any evidence whatsoever that it's actually an externality that we should be warping the economic system to ameliorate if the cost of that, and it will be an increase in absolute privation among the world's poor. So, and here's a.
And I say this all the time. Have you ever heard the left make an argument about policies to fight climate change that don't result in corporations and government massively enriching themselves and the poor and working class footing the bill? Every single solution they come up with leads to that result. Every single one. It's never them. And it's very reminiscent of COVID, which I think they get into, right? Where they tell you these things are dire. It's the end of the world if we don't do this. We have to do this. We all have to make sacrifices. And yet the people that are telling you that, they're not sacrificing at all. Not only are they getting more power and enriched, but they're buying property, beachfront property. They're flying on private jets. They own multiple homes that are putting more carbon into the air than the average person will in 10 years. And, you know, I've had this debate with people, you know, a smart person that I know in real life, way back at the beginnings of my live streaming on my channel, came to my home and we did a video together where we had these sort of debates. And I asked him what his position on climate change was. And he had said something to the effect of, like, if we don't eliminate fossil fuel usage within 10 years, 20 years, whatever it was, that's the end of the earth. That will set us on a course that even if we would change after that, within 100 years, the earth will be wiped out. So in other words, let's say it was 20 years. We have 20 years to completely end fossil fuel usage. And if we don't, and we decide to end it on the 21st year, that's too late. Within 100 years, we'll all be dead. Okay? That's his position. So clearly, given that, he thinks it's the end of the world within 100 years, he's going to want to suggest radical changes. So he says we should immediately stop using fossil fuels in the United States, to which, of course, I respond, that's clearly going to lead to the deaths of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, particularly in low economic status areas, such as where I live in rural Pennsylvania, that wouldn't have access to alternative forms of fuel fast enough, so we would freeze to death in the winter, wouldn't be able to refrigerate our food, wouldn't be able to drive to work, etc., etc. Well, maybe we'd have a slight transition period. Okay, I'm glad you thought that through after you just signed the death warrant of millions of people into this country. But fine, fair enough. Now you've rethought and you're like, well, you know, we'll seek to delay that somewhat so that there will be some sort of transition. Okay. I was like, but you're aware that the United States is no longer the biggest carbon producer. What are you going to do, say, in India? Now, in India, their life expectancy's dramatically increased since they had a power grid. And their power grid's very rudimentary. In many places, you see generators running on coal or diesel fuel, which is very dirty. Are you going to tell them, sorry, you got to go back to the way it was 40 years ago? That's billions of people. You're just going to tell them that? What about China? And he's like, well, we'd share our technology. I was like, yeah, but they'll say, well, great, the United States is no longer buying oil. We'll buy it. Now it'll be even cheaper. Demand's decreased. Now we could buy it even cheaper and burn it even more. They're not going to go along with this scheme. They're going to say, wow, the United States is shooting themselves in the foot economically. Now we could be the world superpower just by using cheap fuel. And he's like, wow. I was like, would you go to war with them? He said, yeah. If that's what it took, we would. I don't know how we're going to fight this war without fossil fuels, but neither here nor there. Ultimately, after about 40 minutes of discussion, I got him to admit that the policy prescription he was calling for would result in the death of, and I'm quoting now, billions of people. With a B, billions of people will die if my friend got the policies that he wanted to fight climate change. And I said, I just have one more question for you. How certain are you that you're right? How certain are you that if we don't end fossil fuels within the next 10 or 20 years, that the entire world's going to die? And he said 40, 50%. I did see that, King Barna. My friend just suggested killing multi-billions of people because he's 40% confident that it's necessary. Do you see how extreme that is? Do you see the insane? This is not some person that's a moron. It's a very intelligent person. He does sound quite silly, but that's the overarching belief on the left when you talk to these people. They don't give a shit. They start under the assumption that they're correct, that the entire earth will end. And so therefore no policy is too extreme. And you can see exactly how that played out with COVID. We're all going to die of COVID, so your kid shouldn't be allowed to go to school. And we don't want to hear your bullshit. There's a consensus that COVID's that serious, so we can't send your kid to school. It didn't matter that all the research showed at the time the kids were actually more safe at school. The kids were far less likely to contract COVID and far less likely to spread it than adults. And that there would be incredible detriments to not sending kids to school and not allowing kids to socialize. Didn't matter. Meanwhile, the same people that were telling you that you had to make sacrifices, you were non-essential, you couldn't go out to work, you couldn't go to your daughter's wedding, you couldn't go to your father's funeral, they were having parties in Martha's Vineyard. They were having huge funeral celebrations for Democrat congresspeople that had died. They were going to the French Laundry for dinner. They were going to the salons that they were telling you you couldn't go to. They were going out and marching with Black Lives Matter. That was basically a terrorist organization that was causing riots all across the country. So is the argument to ignore climate change. The argument's to be honest about climate change. Is the climate changing? Yes. Of course. That's the end of the consensus. How much is it changing? How bad will the effects be? How much do humans cause it? All of these are rife areas with significant diversity of opinions. And yet we censor those opinions. We browbeat people and say, shut up! You're a climate change denier. There's a consensus. It also ignores the fact that many of the metrics that people said we needed to be met are being met. For example, when I debated in college around 2004, I think it was 2004, the topic that year was the United States federal government should be resolved to sign one of the following 5 treaties. It was like the SORT Treaty on Strategic Nuclear Arms Reduction, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty on no longer testing nuclear weapons. One of them was called the Kyoto Protocol. The Kyoto Protocol was very similar to the Paris Climate Accords. And it suggested, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that each signed country should reduce their carbon emissions from that year by 20% by the year 2020. The United States met that obligation, even though we never signed it. And yet we're told, well, they were wrong. The Kyoto Protocol people were wrong. That's nothing. We didn't need government enforcement to get there. There was a natural move in the free market to have cheaper fuels. Coal became much cleaner. Other forms, natural gas, things like that became cleaner. And yes, there were renewables that started to organically press up. When the government gets involved and tries to enforce renewables and punish people for using fossil fuels, it always results in the people of the country, the average working class people and poor people paying more. And it doesn't solve the problem. For example, I was reading a study the other day that said only 5% of plastics that were recycled actually make it to the recycling plant. 5%. But it's a virtue signal that feels good. Oh, we recycle. It does almost nothing. Germany, as Jordan Peterson brought up here, Germany ended up using more imported fuel that was reliant on coal because in an effort to have clean energy, they shut down all of these coal power plants and things like nuclear. So now they're actually putting more carbon in the air than before they had these green energy initiatives. They're just importing it. Why not more nuclear? Right. Because nuclear is a clean fuel that for some reason, well, I know the reason, the left doesn't like. Because it doesn't go to the preferred businesses that they want. All right, let's keep going.
Additional argument on that front with regards to externalities. You get that wrong, and here's something you could get right instead. If you ameliorate absolute poverty, among the world's 1 billion poorest, they take a longer view of the future. And that means they become environmentally aware. And so the fastest route to a sustainable planet could well be the remediation of absolute poverty. And the best route to that is cheap energy.
That's absolutely true. And in fact, I could go even further than that. What you see historically, this is absolutely true. It's something, the argument that I ran in debate almost every single tournament I was in was business confidence, which is basically an economic argument. The problem with debate would be, let's say that my side wins that we help the economy, but your side wins that we harm the environment. Who wins the debate then? So you have what's called impacts. What's the bigger impact? A detrimental economy or detrimental environment, right? There are 4 ways that you could evaluate impacts, right? The first is magnitude. How big is it? So, for example, if the magnitude of hurting the economy is, and that will put 100,000 people out of jobs, but the magnitude of hurting the environment is that will lead to the end of the world, then the magnitude is bigger on the environmental side. The next would be probability. I could say there's a very strong probability a lowered economy will cause people to lose jobs, cause more quality of life to diminish, cause more disease, etc. But the probability of the world dying from climate change is probably very low. So probability, you might say, well, the economic argument wins. The next argument is time frame. Which one happens sooner? Well, the economic impacts could be almost immediate. Climate change could take hundreds of years. But the last one, and this is one that's the hardest for people to understand, we called it case turn. Basically, it's a clever way of saying, how does your impact affect other impacts? And the truth is, the better a country's economy is, and even an individual, the better an individual's economy is, almost every impact that you could think of is made better. For example, let's say you're concerned about racism. Do you think a country that is economically very successful and has almost no poor people is more or less likely to be racist? It's less. Countries where there's more economic disparity or there's more abject poverty tend to be more racist. They tend to have more domestic abuse. Here's some other things they do. You know what happens when a country gets very poor? What do you think? You want to know what the first things they do is? Here's 2 very common things that a country, particularly an industrialized country, that ends up finding its way to a poverty situation. They go to war. How do you think war affects the environment? Harms it significantly, particularly as more advanced weaponry becomes possible. Or they seek to use cheap and readily available natural resources. So if you're a country that ends up in poverty, all of a sudden that rainforest that you were protecting, fuck that, cut that down, we need money. We're going to sell it. I have no problem with building up renewable energy sources. The problem I have is with government fiat, the government doing it. That's the problem. Because as Jordan Peterson's making the point here, when you have a command-directed economy, it fails almost always. So what we could see is, remember Solyndra? All of these companies that we gave billions of tax dollars to that went belly up and the people walked away with huge amounts of money, but didn't put a dent in any of the energy. Or you see situations like where there's brownouts. Similarly, as countries become more wealthy, and that's the argument Peterson's making here, they become more environmentally conscious. Because they say, oh, I'm not struggling to eat now. We want to make sure our country's beautiful for years in the future. So we see these natural resources that we want to make sure we're protecting. Perhaps our local forest. Perhaps we don't want to drill everywhere. Perhaps we want to say, hey, we want to make sure we're not polluting as much. For First off, you're erroneous that renewables are anywhere near being improved to being cheaper than fossil fuels in a way that would substantially impact our energy grid. It's just fundamentally not true. We're not even close. The only option we have at this point is nuclear. There is a place for increasing nuclear that's readily available that would be able to make an impact in our grid. But alternatives such as wind power, solar power, biofuels, they've talked about these for years. They are nowhere near being ready. Yes, you're right that there is a problem that the government sponsors fossil fuels, subsidize them. That is a problem. They shouldn't be doing that. But the answer isn't to then turn around, punish fossil fuel companies like Joe Biden saying, I'm going to put you out of business, and then putting money into unreliable renewables. It will result in places like California that is one of the wealthiest, it would be one of the wealthiest countries in the world on its own, having brownouts. That's absurd. Thanks, TM. I appreciate it. But those technologies will become more efficient over time, not through government intervention, but through private entrepreneurs that are working hard to make those more profitable, because they'll see a niche in the market and say, oh, okay. Yeah, I can engage the hypothetical, no problem. I don't think the government should be sponsoring fossil fuels. They shouldn't be sponsoring renewables. Put it this way, all things equal, if I could go to the pump and get energy for my car, whatever it may be, and on one hand, one's cheaper than the other, and it's better for the environment, fuck yeah, I'm taking the cheaper one that's better for the environment. In fact, if it's equal and it's better for the environment, of course I'd take the one that's better for the environment. Sponsoring renewable energy research, in what way? Through government tax dollars? No. Now, I'm not naive. I understand that the government's not going to stop taxing us. So if I had to choose whether to send my money to sponsor renewables versus proffering a war in Ukraine, yeah, I guess the lesser of those sins is the renewables. But we could already see this. This is what happens. Go look up the Salinger case. Oh, the government's just providing research for renewables. And then it ends up bearing no fruit and makes a bunch of people rich, and your tax dollar, your inflation goes up.
And we're interfering with the development of cheap energy by meddling with the hypothetically detrimental externality of carbon dioxide. And so I think this is a complete bloody travesty, by the way. We are putting the lives of hundreds of millions of people directly at risk right now to hypothetically save people in the future, depending on the accuracy of our projections, 100 years out. And these interventionists, these people who are remediating externalities, they actually believe that they can calculate an economic projection 1 century out. That's utterly delusional.
So, okay, so just as to be clear, the first thing, I was just giving an example of how you can use like a government intervention to make a free market track something, which is what cap and trade or like carbon taxes would do. I wasn't necessarily speaking to the strength of that individual thing, but
yeah, but that's a good thing to focus on.
Yeah, we can focus on that as well.
Externality.
Yeah, we can focus on that as well. So, the first thing, this is going to sound mean, but I'm very realistic. There needs to be a better argument than just it disproportionately impacts the poor. That's not always
a classic leftist argument.
It might be about
right, but it's the same argument you made to justify your swing to the left
Right.
at the beginning of our discussion. You said
that is absolutely right. Peterson nails him here. That's right. When he asked Destiny, can you define left? He said more distributive, tax people. The government takes that and distributes, right? And he said the reason I became more left wing was because once I started to make more money, I saw that people that were working hard and weren't making money weren't necessarily, even if these options were available to them, they weren't able to take advantage of them. So I supported becoming more of a leftist, right? And then Destiny immediately, his first answer in response to Jordan Peterson saying, look, the lefty answer to climate change of things like carbon taxes actually disproportionately harms the poor. And Destiny's like, well, who gives a shit about them? Right. Now, I'll be interested to hear what Destiny says, but that is a fantastic point and good on Peterson for bringing it up, because it is a point that's not only true in the abstract, but it's true in the context of specifically what the arguments Destiny's made has been. So I'm interested to see how he tries to justify this.
And that you were looking at economic inequalities that disproportionately affected the poor. So I can't see why, and I'm not trying to be mean about this either. I can't see why you could base your argument that it was moral it was morally appropriate for you to swing to the left from your previous position because you saw disproportionate effects on the poor. And I can't use that argument in the situation that I'm presenting it right now.
Well, because it depends on if we think it's a condition that ought to be remedied or not. For instance, if I walk, around and I see homeless people, and I'm like, man, this is really sad. We ought to spend more money on homeless people because it seems like they're disproportionately affected by their living conditions. And then somebody says, oh, well, do you think we should still lock up, rapists and murderers? Aren't they disproportionately poor? I'd probably say, well, yeah, we probably should. And I go, well, isn't that hypocritical? Well, no, I think that rapists and murderers should probably be in jail, but we can also help the homeless at the same time. I think that.
But that's the problem with this argument is that he's talking about people that are making conscious choices to do something that we would consider negative. For example, it doesn't matter if let's make it even more controversial than this. We wouldn't say, well, eliminate the crime of armed robbery because more black people commit armed robbery. Therefore, if you're someone who's concerned about racial equality, we should say we should no longer prosecute people that commit armed robbery because it would affect black people. And Destiny's like, well, that would be stupid because we could say we still could care about racial equality while saying it's still important to prosecute these people. But the reason that's talking about inflicting justice on someone or using justice on someone who is consciously engaged in a behavior that we as society claim or deem is something that shouldn't be acceptable. That's different than this idea of climate change. The poor person has not only not done anything uniquely to affect the subject at hand, climate change, chances are the poor person probably affects climate change less than many of the wealthy people. For example, Leonardo DiCaprio flying around on a private Learjet is putting more carbon into the atmosphere than the guy living under a bridge or the guy working 9 to 5. So the problem is Destiny is obfuscating. He's saying, but see, people that are morally culpable in something, we still punish them even if it disproportionately affects the poor. Therefore, it's still okay to put the impetus on solving an external issue like climate change on the poor while simultaneously saying, I care about the poor. I'll check it out sometime, yeah.
Just helping the poor isn't an argument like a blank check to do every possible thing to satisfy poorer people.
Right,
It's going to depend on from issue to issue.
That's fine.
So, like, for
But
instance,
that's
I think
because the poor, everyone who's poor is not a victim. Some people who are poor are psychopathic perpetrators.
Sure.
And it's very useful to distinguish them. But I was making a much more specific argument. My argument was that the fastest way out of absolute privation for the world's bottom billion people is through cheap energy.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. So I just work my way towards that.
Yeah.
I just want to say that just because something targets the poor is not necessarily an argument against it.
Depends on how hard it targets them, and it depends on whether mass starvation is the outcome.
The outcome is important. That I agree with. So, for instance, like a sin tax.
The outcome will be mass starvation.
I'm getting to it. Okay. I'm getting to it. Okay. Sin taxes on like cigarettes and alcohol are always going to disproportionately impact the poor, or even sugar, we might say, right? But just because that disproportionately impacts the poor, is that a good thing or a bad thing? These are probably the people that suffer the most from those particular afflictions. Right.
So, and that is an immediate versus delayed issue too, right? Because the reason.
I mean, obesity isn't immediate. I don't think alcoholism
the reason for the tax is to stop people from pursuing a certain form of short-term gratification at the cost of their longer-term well-being.
Correct. And that exact same idea, if you believe climate models or if you believe that we're heading in a certain direction in terms of climate, the overall warming of the planet, would be the same argument you would make for climate change.
Only if you believe that you could model economic development 100 years into the future.
Right. Two problems with this. One, it still disproportionately targets the poor, and the poor are disproportionately not affecting climate change, right? And to the extent that you could claim they are, for example, in developed nations, you've sentenced them to death, is what you've done. So you could make the argument that the vice tax isn't killing someone. In fact, it's arguably, even though I'd be against the vice tax, it's trying to make them healthier, is what the proponents of it would say. We tax cigarettes, which disproportionately affects poor people, because we hope that poor people stop smoking and they get healthier. Right? The argument with sort of carbon tax or the elimination of fossil fuel or discouragement of fossil fuels is the poorer countries that you might say pollute more, like a country like India and the poor population there that uses sort of dirty fossil fuels, you're literally talking about shelving years off their life expectancy. And you know it. Zudum says, isn't the conservative talking point, pick yourself up by the bootstraps if you're poor and not doing anything to change your circumstances? Why is that everyone else's problem? There are some people that say that, right? But let's assume that that's the case. Even the people that would believe that to the most maximum extent probably would also believe that that means that there shouldn't be government interventions into the markets. So if I adapt the belief every poor person should pick themselves up by the bootstraps, then simultaneously I would have to have the belief that the government shouldn't intentionally be putting their thumb on those people so they can't pick themselves up by the bootstraps. So, for example, if the government says, pick yourself up by the bootstrap, or if someone says, pick yourself up by the bootstraps, but the government says, but poor people aren't, you can only drive, the only cars we'll allow on the road are cars that are from the past 4 years. Cars before that pollute too much. We just don't allow them. The pick yourself up by the bootstraps people would be like, well, that fucking sucks. Because this poor person that's busting their ass to go to McDonald's to work 14 hours a day so they can feed their family, they're trying to pick themselves up by the bootstraps. Now they won't be able to go to work because they can't afford one of those newer cars and they were driving an older car that they worked on themselves. You see the point?
I'm not trying to model. We're more concerned with modeling climate development, economic development.
We're
Yes,
equally
absolutely.
well, okay. Tell me how I'm wrong. I don't believe that, because what I see happening is two things. We have climate models that purport to explain what's going to happen over a century on the climate side, but we have economic models layered right on top of those that claim that there's going to be various forms of disaster for human beings economically as a consequence of that climate change. And so that's like two towers of Babel stacked on top of one another. And so, because if people were just saying, oh, the climate's going to change, there'd be no moral impetus in that. It's, the climate's going to change and that's going to be disastrous for the biosphere and for humanity. But that's an economic argument as well as a climate.
Right. And in fact, they're very well aware it's an economic argument, and they specifically make the economic argument because they know the price right now is exorbitant. It will cost trillions of dollars to implement plans like the Green New Deal. Most of that money is going to come, like it always does, out of the pockets of the poor and working class. So one of the ways they try to justify it is they say, well, models show that within 100 years, we're going to have to use 15% of our GDP to fight the effects of climate change. That's exactly the argument Jordan Peterson's making here, is they don't just, no one would give a shit if it's just like the temperature would increase 1 degree in the next 100 years. There has to be some sort of impact as to why that would negatively affect people. Some of the impacts they talk about are disease or loss of biodiversity. But the impact that they sell that people understand the most is it's going to cost a lot of money to deal with this. Isn't that an argument to raise the minimum wage? What I said, an argument to raise the minimum wage? No, it'd be the opposite. Pick yourself up by the bootstrap people would say that if for example, Milton Friedman makes this argument. He says that minimum wage is actually racist against black people. So in Milton Friedman's eyes, this is the argument. I don't make it near as eloquently as him, but he says, imagine that you come out of the civil rights movement and you have a business that arguably doesn't really trust black people. The advantage that the black person had was they could go and say, hey, I'll do this job for $3 an hour. You're paying all these other white people $6 an hour. The employer would say, even if he's racist, would say, well, shit, I'm going to save money. Sure, I'll do that. Then the black person works there, gets the training necessary, proves the value of his work, gets promoted, maybe opens his own shop. But he never has that opportunity if that business owner is forced to pay him the same amount that he would pay anyone else. Who are we to tell an individual that they can't sell their labor for a certain price? If I choose to come work for Alley Cat for $5 an hour, why the hell's the government have the right to tell me that I'm not allowed to do that? And what that does is it prices out people that historically haven't had an opportunity to have traditional training that maybe other populations did. So people that come from families that maybe didn't necessarily have historic wealth or historic training or, in specific jobs. That's right. And there is a lot of evidence. Now, listen, I'm no economic guru, but you should go watch Milton Friedman. He's fantastic in explaining this, that it actually was racist white Southerners that pushed for this. Because they could say, well, why would I hire, Bob, the black kid there? Why would I hire him? He has no training, and I can't afford to pay him $10 an hour with no training. Can you raise the minimum wage for megacorps and not small business? No, you can't do that either. Not just for issues of fairness, but issues of implementation. You can't do that.
Climate-based argument.
It's both, but the worst projections of what would happen if the climate took a disastrous turn are worse than the worst projections of what is our planet going to look like economically if we hardcore police,
Right.
fossil
But why
fuels.
would you? Okay, but
So
I
the
don't
argument-
understand the distinction.
Well,
between.
Okay, this goes back to what I was talking about as weighing magnitudes. Yeah, that's absolutely correct, right? The worst implication, you could find someone who'll say, our worst projection for a climate model is the Earth becomes a ball of fire. But think of where this what is the probability of that occurring? How confident are they that that will occur, right? Versus what's the probability if we spend trillions of dollars next year and eliminate fossil fuels? What's the probability that that'll devastate us economically? 100%. So Destiny, and this is what I've talked about a long time, the same rationale that was used for the Patriot Act is the exact same rationale I see used for climate change action, is the exact same rationale I see used for COVID, which was there is this low probability, basically extinction level event that could occur. Terrorism, using a bioweapon or a nuclear device, a radical disease wiping us all out, the climate wiping us all out. And we're not super confident in it, but it might happen. So therefore, you need to give us near total control and radically reduce your wealth and your freedom. That's what the Patriot Act was. We need to look into all of your material. We need to take away your right to privacy that was guaranteed in the Fourth Amendment. We have to. Why? Well, because the model suggests if a terrorist did X, it would kill us all. Look how big of an impact that is. So we have to do this. And technically they're right. Yes, you're right. If a terrorist got a nuclear weapon and detonated it in the United States, it would not only kill tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, but could quite literally lead to a chain of events that could lead to the end of the world. Same with climate change. They're so sure of these models, but they don't act like it in their private life. And it's just coincidental that it'll be a siphoning of wealth from the poor and working class to the very people that are advocating for these positions.
The models.
Well, the argument would be that whatever pain and suffering poor people might endure right now because of a move towards green energy, that pain and suffering is going to be short-term and far less than the long-term pain and suffering.
Right, but that's dependent on the integrity of the economic models and
the climate models as well, right?
Right, exactly, but in exactly the stacked manner that I described. And like, there's nobody in 1890 who could have predicted what was going to happen in 1990 economically. Not a bit, not a bit. And if we think we can predict like 50 years out now with the current rate of technology and calculate the potential impact of climate change on economic flourishing for human beings, we're deluded. No one can do that. And then, it's worse. So imagine that as you do that and you project outward, your margin of error increases. That's absolutely, definitely the case. And at some point, you're certainly on the climate side, the margin of error gets rapidly to the point where it subsumes any estimate of the degree to which the climate is going to transform. And that happens even more rapidly on the economic.
He's talking in a way that might sound confusing, but what he's saying is the further distance you go with predicting economic models, and climate models would be, the more inaccuracies you'll have, the less certain you could be. So for example, just think of this. I know weather's not climate, but think about your weatherman's going to have a far better chance of predicting the weather tomorrow than he will 27 days from now. The further you get out, the less likely your prediction will be the case. Same's true of economic models. It's easier to predict what the economy will look like next month than what it'll look like 10 years from now, because a lot of variables could occur. So it's hard to predict out that. The same's true of climate models, right? And again, the proof is in the pudding. We could go back. They were predicting an ice age in the 70s. That was the prevailing thought. Acid rain was going to wipe us all out. Al Gore predicted the ice caps would be melted by now. So they make these dire predictions, and one of the things it doesn't take into account is the free market and human ingenuity. So, for example, when I was debating this in 2024, when they were the people I were debating were saying, by 2020, this will be our carbon emissions. And in reality, our carbon emissions when we got to 2020 were far less than what they were saying. There were people back then, they were talking, have you ever heard this term? I remember I debated this all the time. Has anyone ever heard the term peak oil? Has anyone heard that? Again, this would have been 2005, 2006. Peak oil was an argument that was very prevalent. In fact, me and my partner ran it. We're running out of oil. That was the argument. 2015, 2016. That we had hit the peak of oil production and now it was going to start to decline, which was going to lead to mass poverty, wars, famine. Right. Didn't take into account fracking. Absolutely right, Roland Stott. Exactly the point Jordan Peterson's making here. That's right. They've talked about peak oil since the 70s as well. Now, they were unable to predict new technologies and new forms of energy production that we would have. Their models didn't take that into account. Or shale, exactly. So it's, and this is like, I remember when I was talking to that same friend I was telling you about his radical climate change stuff. He said, when I drive through the South and I was driving like through Texas and I saw all these wind farms and I saw this and that and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, see, this is what I said. Did Texas pass laws to your knowledge that said mandated those wind farms? He's like, I don't think so. I was like, right. Once it becomes profitable, private businesses will invest in those things. Then they will compete. Then they'll make it more efficient. Eventually, in certain circumstances, it may be more efficient and cheaper than other forms of energy. Then the consumers will gravitate towards that. But the models we look at all assumes like a steady increase in production of CO2. It doesn't assume new technologies organically come. It's very similar to the COVID models, right? So you remember Neil Ferguson from the Imperial College, he famously said that 2.2 million people would die of COVID like within a year or something in a, quote, do-nothing scenario. So when you looked, well, what does do nothing mean? It literally meant do nothing. Now, that doesn't mean government do nothing. That meant that literally the population would see, 20,000 people died last month of COVID. I'm going to go to the Yankees game anyways. Of course that wouldn't be the case. Without government direction, if you saw a bunch of people dying in your neighborhood of a disease, you're going to change your behavior. So what good is a do-nothing scenario? When you might say, well, it's a baseline. None ya business says, I'm performing diarrhea out my mouth. Really? Is that the case? Well, it just so happens I have an open line that you could call in right now. None ya business. And you can explain the diarrhea coming out of my mouth. Right? Not true, Joe Taker. It is true that government-subsidized R&D can sometimes have an effect on how technology comes about. But that's because the government's intervening in the first place. And oftentimes, the best technological advancements come actually in the actual free markets. Let's move on here.
Side.
Potentially,
So-
but right now, this is a disagreement on the fact of the matter, though, not the philosophy of what we're talking about in terms of controlling externalities. If we think, I'm curious, let's say that we think we can accurately predict the climate and the economic impact, and we think that the climate impact would be far worse if we don't account for that, both in terms of human
I
conditions
don't believe any of those presumptions. I
Sure,
think
but
they're
then
both
if you
faulty.
don't, but I mean, like, obviously, if I agreed with that factual analysis, I would probably agree with you on the prescription here too, right? And
Well,
not
I
that, like,
don't-
none of the climate models were accurate or couldn't accurately predict anything.
They're
But I'd
not
also say why
sufficiently.
make.
Well, they're not.
That's not true. It's not true. It's a misnomer to say this. So this is basically the argument Joe Taker's making. We have tons of money that goes to universities, tons of money that goes to all sorts of things. Therefore, anytime something gets developed, and you can make an argument that a person went to those universities, even if they developed it in a free market scenario, we say, it only came about as a result of those government research and development grants. My argument is because there's so much influence that comes from our government and so much intervention that it's necessary. They've set the game as such that that's where most of this stuff's going to come from. And secondly, just because there was a start of something, the vast majority of technologies that we see that actually are breakthroughs of a sufficient way that are sort of life-changing, like, for example, fracking. You're telling me that fracking came from research from government. What university did it come? Go ahead, Joe Taker. Can you tell me the university that fracking technology came from? Go ahead. So we're talking specifically about energy production. You're saying, actually the reason that the free market comes up with this, it's because the government incentivizes it. So go ahead and tell me the university that developed fracking, that came up with it. Go ahead. It's such a lazy argument, and I hear this all the time, right? Actually, because the government's big, anything that's ever worth anything came because the government financed something in the first place, and therefore that's proof that had the government not been financing it, then it would have never came about. It's nonsensical. I saw someone say the other day, it was like, if you took children, right? Let's say that we stopped potty training kids, right? We just stopped. And we said, at 2 years old, we'll send kids to a government agency, public school for potty training. And that's where they'll learn potty training. Within a generation, people would make the argument, but what would we do without government-funded education? Kids wouldn't get potty trained. What would we do? And someone like Jer Turkey would say, actually, you could see how successful it's been.
Sufficiently accurate. That's the first thing. And second, because they have a margin of error, and it's a large margin of error, they don't even model cloud coverage well. That's a big problem. They don't have the resolution. They don't have nearly the resolution to produce the accuracy that's claimed by the climate apocalypse mongers.
People
Not even
keep saying
close.
that, but we just got another one of the hottest years on record. How many times are we going to have another hottest year on record? How many times are we going to have an increase of carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere before we're finally like, okay.
I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because it depends. The scientific answer to that question depends precisely on the time frame over which you evaluate the climate fluctuation. And that's actually an intractable scientific problem. So you might say, well, if you take the last 100 years, this variation looks pretty dismal. And I'd say, well, what if you took the last 150,000 years? Or the last 10,000 or the last 10 million? You can't specify the damn time frame of analysis.
The time frame is incredibly important. That would be like saying, look at your, let's say somebody developed cancer and they didn't realize it, and the person has lost, 40 or 50 pounds in the past 6 months. And I was like, you look very sickly. And you're like, okay, well, look at my weight fluctuation over the past 10 years. You say, well, it doesn't really matter. What matters?
Nah, Todd Sullivan, that's probably not true. Whatever you're reading has to be untrue. Jer Taker's pretty confident that only came about as a result of government R&D. That's why that came about. I will tell you some things that came about as a result of government R&D. COVID, there's a good example. Thanks to their generous funding of gain of function on COVID viruses, we got that, so that was a good one. I'm not saying nothing's ever occurred because of government R&D, but the problem is when you set up a system where the government has massive control over industry through regulation and massive control over our education system and massive control over spending, and then say, see, these advancements all came about because of government intervention, sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, what Jordan's talking about here is, right, the Destiny's answer is not going to make... Let's actually hear him through first.
I'm not saying the time frame isn't important. I'm saying that it is important.
Yeah,
I'm saying I don't know how to specify it.
Well, you would probably specify it with the beginning of the industrial age, right?
Why?
Because that's when carbon dioxide, which is a gas that's seen as trapping more heat on the planet.
Why is that relevant to the time over which you compute the variability?
Because it seems like as carbon dioxide has increased in the atmosphere, the surface temperatures have risen at a rate that is a departure from what we'd expect over 150,000 year cycles of temperature variation on the planet.
No, not with that time frame. That's just not the case.
It's absolutely the case.
No,
it's not the case, right? Because what he's starting with an assumption, right? It would be no different than if I said this. Since we've allowed gay marriage, we've had hotter years on record. And you'd be like, well, yeah, that could just be a coincidence. There could be other factors. What Destiny's saying is we start with the assumption that carbon dioxide's causing temperatures to dramatically increase. And our proof of that is we've looked at, since there's been more carbon dioxide in the past 150 years, temperatures have increased. But Jordan's argument is, what if we're in a natural cycle where there's an uptick? What if we zoom out and we look, instead of at the last 150 years, the last 150,000 years? And it turns out, actually, we're at quite a cool period. So we're far cooler than a time in the past where there was far less where there was no human intervention, and probably less carbon dioxide in the air. So actually, we're in a cooling period that's naturally getting hotter. And so we don't have that much variance from, say, 150 years ago to today, as if many other periods, when we take 150-year slices in many other periods. There's someone in my waiting room. Was I expected someone? We'll see. All right. What's up?
Oh, hello.
Hello. Who were you? Someone that was on the chat?
No, I saw you were talking about climate change as well, and I've decided to talk to you about climate change, I guess.
Oh, well, I was reviewing a debate. I did offer one person that said, I told one person to call in and say to debate me, but that's fine. Go ahead. So what'd you have that you wanted to say?
Well, I guess I'm not sure where to begin exactly. I guess I mean, for me, it's pretty simple. I don't know absolutely everything about every piece of science, but I do know that I tend to trust the scientists who come up with the stuff, and the model's pretty clear, at least to what I've been shown. And for that matter, it seems to be something that's widely accepted, but across the entire scientific field, because it's climate change.
Can you explain to me when you say it's widely accepted across the scientific field? What is
climate change is occurring, and climate change that is occurring that is man-made.
Okay, so you're saying that across the scientific field, there's basically consensus that the climate's changing and that man's causing it.
Yeah.
Okay, can you tell me you've looked at the models, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, can you tell me what the impacts of this will be in, say, 100 years?
I don't know exactly. There's parts of it that I do understand to be a bit more. The word is, it's like emergent properties that come from it. Like an example being like climate change increasing across the entire system. The system being Earth. Okay, and then you have like little. We'll go to like somewhere north and we'll look at permafrost. It melts, and while that's bad in and of itself, the bigger problem than just the permafrost melting is it changes the landscape, which allows new things to start occurring which wouldn't otherwise happen. And then that, for example, comes with a good example of the methane that's beneath some of these permafrost places that have been melting. If that methane manages to get out, which it is trying, it's almost like it's bubbling a little bit, like it's managing to crack through on pieces of the surface. If that methane gets out and it all vaporizes, right, and that gets into the entire system as well, I know that methane is better at consolidating, keeping heat. It's better at keeping it. It doesn't diffuse heat as easily.
Okay, but that says nothing to me, right? And I'll tell you why, right? What you said basically is, well, there's a consensus that humans are changing the climate. And I'm like, well, what will the impacts be? And you're like, well, it's emergent. Like, for example, permafrost might thaw, and then it'll release methane, and then things could get even warmer.
Okay.
But
I guess
let me.
it
It works best if we leave each other talk, right? So the problem is, I need a reason why that's a bad impact for us, for people, for Earth, right? Like, because I could think, let's say I live in Siberia, right? And all of a sudden the temperature increases 2 degrees. Do you think that would make my life better or worse?
I get you're saying that it may not affect you there, but it affects. I'm talking about the entire system of the Earth. First, it's just the climate, right? First, it's just we're talking about the base, like how much heat can be held in.
Right. I hate to do this because right.
I'll get there.
You've read the models, so tell me what the impact will be. Like, you're going through a process. You're going through a process. Like, I get it. Like, you could say, well, maybe the butterflies go away. And once the butterflies, then the iguanas will suffer. Once the iguanas suffer, then perhaps birds of prey that feed. I don't need that lecture. I'm asking you, what's the model suggest the impact will look like 100 years from now?
It's not good, and that's why I said that there's other things that we don't know exactly.
Define
That's why I
not
brought up-
good.
a runaway greenhouse effect could happen easily with methane.
Which does
That's just
what?
one example.
What?
That's just one example.
The models are dealing in things like measurements, right? So they're measuring methane, or they're measuring CO2, or predicting it. And so here, let's just do the most basic one. How 100 years from now, nothing changes. You've looked at the models. What's the degree of increase in temperature?
I'm not sure exactly. I don't have. I told you I'm not like my degree. What I study is not actually climate change. I do understand the physics behind a lot of these.
But here's
like basic things.
Well, let me
ozone formation and the idea that there's going to be
let me tell you
feedback.
let me tell you why it matters, right? Because the climate. Would you agree with this? The climate is always changing. It changed before humans.
Not like this.
That's not my question. Has the climate always been changing?
Not like this. No.
Okay, if you can't engage in honest yes/no answers, then we'll just have to cut the conversation.
Yes or no?
Well, because I'm asking you a question. Like, if, for example, if you say, like, do you want to stop people from starving? And I'm like, I can't answer the question. I can't. It's a unique, like, that doesn't lead to a productive conversation. So I ask the question again. Is the climate always changing? Even before humans?
I reject the premise of the question,
Okay.
unfortunately.
All right, man. We're gonna have to let you go then, because
Wait,
it's not
dude,
going to.
I'm just talking,
No. I
You're
understand
not
you just.
debating,
No, it's not going to be a fruitful conversation, because people that are in good faith
Because you want a
talking
yes
with
or no
each-
answer, but
right.
it's not black and white.
Wait, it is black or white. The answer
No,
is
it's
either yes.
certainly
The answer,
not.
yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Let
There's
me
tons of stuff
answer.
we don't know.
You ready? Let me pretend to be you. I'll turn my hat and I'll answer as you. Right? Of course,
please
the climate.
don't pretend.
You ready?
Don't do
No.
that.
I will
You
to
might
show
as well
you.
just end the conversation if you're going to do that.
Well, that's right. I might as well, because I could give your position in a good faith
No.
way better than you can. What you could have said was
can't.
this. Right?
No,
You ready?
don't know what's in my head. You
Okay.
don't know what's in my head. How you want to talk about dishonest?
How do you know I can't if you won't hear what I'm about to say?
You're telling me that I have to give you a yes or no
I'm
answer
telling you.
to a question. I genuinely don't have a yes or no answer to give.
That's
It's
bullshit.
like,
You have a yes or no. You have a yes or no. You
No,
don't
I
know.
don't.
So your argument is you legitimately don't know if the climate has always been changing. That's your argument.
Because the premise suggests that it's changing across.
Okay,
the
man.
whole,
We're gonna let you go.
thing. Like,
See ya. All right, bye.
You're the dishonest one, sir.
I'm not dishonest. Here was the
Yeah,
answer.
you are. You're dishonest,
Here's the-
and you're not willing to admit you don't know.
Here's the answer he could have gave. Of course the climate's changing, but I think it's changed. Of course the climate's always changed, even before humanity. Of course that's true. But I would argue that it's changing far more significantly in a shorter period of time now because of the action that humans are taking. You can see that humans have had a massive change in the landscape of our environment. So it would only make sense that it would be able to change our climate, our ozone, the production of things like carbon dioxide in the air, which is going to have significant impacts on the Earth in ways that we haven't seen as rapidly before humans were here. See? See how hard that was? Not hard at all. Not hard at all to make that argument. But he couldn't do it. Could not do it. The reason that question is important is because what I'm going to say is we have to measure these things in a cost-benefit analysis. Him just saying things will change, I've seen the models, but I don't really know what the models say, I haven't looked in that, then it's difficult to talk about what the possible prescription should be. For example, if we don't know what the ultimate impact of climate change, let's say that the models that he's talking about, that he can't tell me what they say that there will be a 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature within 100 years. Okay, then we could look and say, well, hypothetically, what would that look like? That would cause sea levels to rise to what proportion? That would cause permafrost to unthaw to what proportion? That would cause a loss of biodiversity to what proportion? What would the economic and life impacts of humanity be for that? Maybe we would have to spend $1 trillion a year to fight those impacts in the future. Then we have to take that information and what that impact would be and evaluate on what sacrifices we need to make today in order to stave off those impacts that we're talking about. In other words, what happens is we have people like the caller that just called in, right? That'll say, things are it's gonna be bad. And I'm like, really? What's gonna happen? Things are changing. Permafrost, methane. Okay? Yeah. And I'm like, right, well, that might not be bad for everyone. There could be areas that would be beneficial. So how do we evaluate this impact? Like, how do we codify it? Right? And then what you start with, what I'm trying to get at is just saying it's changing isn't an impact. That's why I'm expecting him to be like, of course the climate has always changed. And the point I'm going to make is right. So you can see just the climate changing itself isn't something that we uniquely have to be like, oh, that's the end all be all. It has to be some external impact beyond that, which is all I was trying to get. But he can't be good faith. He can't be good faith about it at all. Where did you send me, Jertaker, the fracking info? To Discord? Thank you, Miss Young Lady. Thanks for the follow. YouTube chat. I don't see it. You're going to have to repost it. I don't see it. There was a lot of chat since that person called in that I was unable to read, so resend it. Resent above. Yeah, it's not showing up to me. And maybe it's because you're not a mod and you can't post links, but you can see what I could see on the chat there. I'm not seeing it. So, yeah. I'm not denying that you're trying to send it, but I didn't kick the guy. I muted him so I could say what I was going to say, and then I was going to leave him back on. Bad faith no more, permafrost. But you can see how these people are. And it's the same thing. I've had that climate debate dozens upon dozens of times. There's a consensus. I say yes. I believe there is a scientific consensus that the climate is changing. I also believe there's a scientific consensus that the Earth, or that humans have something to do with it. What the hell is this? What is this? So this is what Jertaker wanted me to read. The early 21st century has witnessed a boom in oil and natural gas production that promises to turn the United States into a new form of petrostate. The boom raises various questions scholars have begun to explore, including questions of risk governance, federalism, and export policy. Relatively neglected, however, have been questions of why technological revolution behind the boom occurred and what this revolution teaches about innovation theory and policy. The boom in the U.S. shale gas production reflected long gestating infrastructure developments, a convergence of technological advances, government-sponsored research and development, the presence or absence of intellectual property rights and tangible assets such as land and minerals, and tax and regulatory relief. Consequently, the story behind the boom reaches far beyond risk-taking and the persistence of George Mitchell, whose independent production company achieved pioneering success with hydraulic fracking in Texas, Barrett Shale. Indeed, the broader story demonstrates how a blend of distinct policy levers, reasonably adjusted over time, can combine to foster a diverse, innovative ecosystem with a robust game for changing innovation. So, Jertaker's point is this. Jertaker's point is nothing of worth that you ever see came about without government research and development. The point I'm trying to make is when the government has the monopoly on these sorts of things, when it operates at $1 trillion budgets and all of this shit, when it controls so much of our academia, when it has regulation as this abstract is seeming to suggest, that, by the way, don't you love someone who's so smug, who doesn't know shit all about what they're talking about, but they read the abstract? No, Jertaker's argument was so much of what we comes from government research and development. That's more accurate. And so then I read this abstract. It says government research and development. What he's ignoring is it also says that point about how their regulations, their control of permits and things like that largely also went into the story of how this was created, which was exactly my point. The argument that Jertaker's having you believe is that, well, we still need government research and development because so much of what we use technologically is advanced by that. My argument is once the government has a monopoly on these sorts of things, that of course you'll then do post hoc be able to say, see, the government had a hand in these things being created. which is exactly what Jurtaker's trying to do. I understand it. I get it. Jurtaker also, he's giving the rationale for so much. And again, I'm never saying that there was never any government research and development that went into any scientific advance that we use today. In fact, the free internet largely was used as a tool of the CIA. VPNs, things like that, were created by the CIA that were used to then foster color revolutions in other countries, which they're then now rebutting and going against us. The government wouldn't be needed for these innovations if the government didn't exist and have a monopoly on these innovations, is where they occur. But I understand people like Jurtaker that probably are biased towards wanting these institutions to exist. I would love to talk to Jurtaker. Let's get his opinions on what he thought about like scientific intervention when it came to things like gain of function research. I never said it was. Well, no, I don't think it's a necessity for it. I think that is a fundamentally true statement, though I don't know that I ever said it. The government is not necessary for innovation. Innovation existed before government existed. Yes. Is it true that the government can fund things that lead to innovation? Yes. Would most of those things inevitably come about even if we didn't have government? Yes. Because the government stacked the deck to make themselves self-important and necessary. Thanks, Max Lang. I appreciate it. For example, take IPR, intellectual property right. So the government could force, through the power of force, could say that you can't use certain things unless you give rights to patents held by certain organization, etc. The government basically could decide who's allowed to work on certain medications and things like that. Then when you say, look, a medical advance came about, the government had a hand in it. Right, because they put themselves there. Holy shit, it's damn near 11. We've gotten so far off track that I'm only 42 minutes into this Jordan Peterson
What do you mean?
debate.
You just flipped to 150,000 year time span.
What I'm saying is that if we expect to see a temperature do this in a 150,000 year time span, in a 100 year time span, seeing it do this, that's very worrying. Now,
I mean,
it could
like
be the
Michael
case-
Mann's hockey stick, the one that's under attack right now in court by a major statistician who claimed that he falsified his data. I mean, that spike?
I'm talking about the record temperatures that are declared, that have been declared for like the past 5 years, that have also increased with the concentration of parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. I mean, I'm not going to tell you that every model is perfect.
They're
but
not
right now,
perfect.
sure, but right now we're like standing in traffic with our eyes closed, saying the car hasn't hit me yet, so I don't think there's any coming. I think it's pretty undeniable at this point that there is an impact on climate across the planet. I
think that's highly deniable. We have no idea what the impact is from. We don't know where the carbon dioxide is from. We can't measure the warming of the oceans. We have terrible temperature records going back 100 years. Almost all the terrestrial temperature detection sites were first put outside urban areas, and then then you have to correct. Then you have to correct for the movement of the urban areas, and then you introduce an error parameter that's larger than the purported increase in temperature that you're planning to measure. This isn't data. This is guess. And there's something weird underneath it. There's something weird that isn't.
Now, listen, I have to be honest. We're probably going to table this, and we'll come back to it some other day because I probably wanted to be done streaming around 11. It'll be about 3 hours for me. He doesn't get what Jordan Peterson was saying there, that the data is being manipulated or was made up and was corrupt. And if you're looking at things in a small like time frame, like what would Destiny say if in the next 5 years temperatures precipitously drop for 5 years in a row? When he said, well, that's it, the models were all wrong? Of course not. He'll say, well, no, we need to broaden out the time frame. We need to broaden it out. The question is, how far do you broaden it out? For example, if we go back 150,000 years, do you think there was a 150-year time span with a variance of temperatures as much as we have now? Probably. Right? What would the explanation be? Anyways, Jurtaker's fine. I don't mind him. Again, here's the thing. I do have a problem with taxation going things like that. I really do. But I'm not naive. I know that we're not going to usher in a libertarian utopia anytime soon. And there's far bigger fights to be had. Corporate welfare, funding of the military-industrial complex, all sorts of crazy shit funding that's going into academia. Funding a new form of penicillin to, help children that are suffering from bacterial infections is far down my list of shit that we need to tackle. The problem is, what happens is once you accept that, like, okay, we would be okay with the government doing that, then it snowballs into, and gender studies in Afghanistan, right? Same thing. Hey, Jojo, I hope everything's going good, man. How was your checkup? I'll have to text you. No, I think that the bridge that fell, I think the insurance company of the shipping company should pay for it. If they can't, then their company should be liquidated, all of the assets taken, and then, I guess, the local government should fit the bill. Yeah, the Fed shouldn't pay for it. Yeah, I agree, Warsaw Patriot, so... They don't know. Like, again, it's this... How much money is spent on military R&D? Military R&D is something that's worthwhile. One of the functions of... The government has a few fundamental things that it should do. It should protect us from hostile militaries and invaders. It should protect our borders. It should probably do things like print and coin money instead of a Federal Reserve. Basic infrastructure things. Roads, power grid. Funding medical research on how to transition children? No, shouldn't. Good, Jojo. So yes, we should have military. Now, we spend far too much money on our military. But that's because the money's spent in ways that are terrible. I brought up trans for zero reasons because the problem is when you talk about the government funding medical research, we see what the net result of that is. They don't just, it's not, what Jerticker wants you to think is this, but Rob, the way this works is they know that there's going to be a terrible measles outbreak. So the government is diligently at work sending money. We need to come up with a vaccine. We need to come up with medications for this terrible measles outbreak that's not what happens. Yes, there are instances where the government has funded research and development to drugs that have been beneficial to people, but they also spend billions upon billions of dollars in things that are not just completely wasteful, but things that are antithetical to making our society good, such as funding research on trans issues and other such things. Jurtaker wants to be like, oh no, but Rob, we're only talking about the good funding. And Jurtaker's one of these people that would say this: I determine what's good or not, and only the things I determine that are good are the things the government should be funding. And I assure you that they won't fund any of the other things that we're talking about. So when you bring up the trans issue and stuff like that, no, we're not talking about that. We're just saying, shouldn't they have funded penicillin? Shouldn't they have? Right, but that's not what's occurring, is it? Once you say, okay, I guess I am making the target. I made this criticism, which you haven't rebutted, which is once you accept that it's okay for them to fund penicillin, then you don't have an argument as to why it's not okay for them to fund trans issues. Because they'll say, well, we'll fund things that the scientific community says are medically important, like funding penicillin and funding transitional care, gender-affirming care. So can you tell me the body that we should trust or implement that decides which sort of medical R&D should be allowed and which sort of medical R&D shouldn't be? Go ahead, Jurtaker. Tell us what your answer to that problem is. They funded gain of function on COVID in the exact same rationale that they funded research on things like penicillin. Same rationale. So go ahead and explain to us how you could assure through the system that you're advocating for that sort of stuff wouldn't be done. How could you assure? What sort of body would you ensure? Because what you seem to, I'm making a criticism that, yes, you're right. There are things that the government has funded in the past. I even gave specifics that weren't medical. I said, for example, free internet. There's all sorts of things that the government have a role in research and development that are beneficial to people. However, there's also a massive amount of stuff that has been completely wasteful and stuff that has been literally detrimental to society. The question is, once we say that, we have to support the government funding these sorts of things, how do you ensure the funding goes to the things that you want to talk about, which are things like funding a drug like penicillin, and the things you don't want to talk about, like trans care or gain of function with COVID, you're like, no, that's off the mark. We can't talk about that. My argument is once you accept one, then you're necessarily accepting all of this. You're apparently saying no, so I'm asking you, what is your argument? What is the body or that you say that we should trust that will make the good decisions but not the bad decisions? That's what I'm asking you. Because I'm saying that I believe these innovations would have occurred just like they occurred prior to government funding, that there were innovations that occurred in the medical field, in the scientific community, etc. But once the government got so big and so gigantic, as Jordan Peterson's putting, they've sort of interjected themselves in such a way that now now it's a necessity to go through them. Anyways, conversation for another day. I got some stuff I got to do. Tomorrow's my Easter, and the wife said, thank you, Gizmo. I really appreciate the subs. I really do. Tomorrow's my Easter, so I got to go downstairs and help my wife with some food and stuff. However, before I go, I do have a special shout out to give. First, I do want to give a shout out to my brother Jojo, who went back for his checkup today with his eye, and he said he's doing good. And he goes back in a couple weeks. So we're all thinking of you, Jojo. Hopefully the surgery. That's right. But we're talking about an area of necessity because I say that military is one of the necessary governments of function. I don't say medical R&D is one of the necessary functions of government. So I can accept that there will things that will be done that are wasteful spending and things that are negative that our military will do, but that's a function of the government. That's something that we should accept is a reason for government existing. It's probably the most fundamental reason. When people started to form governments in the first place, the first thing they thought about was, we need to protect ourselves from outsiders. They might have said, we need to develop new spears. We need to develop new catapults. Whatever the case would have been. I don't have a problem with that. Even there might be problems in the specifics of wasteful spending. That is not the case. That is not the case when it comes to medical R&D. So, for example, you could say, well, Rob, you said that they should print and coin money, but is that not true? That they couldn't have made bad decisions and wasteful spending with printing and coining of money? Of course. Anyways, moving on from this discussion. So, shout out to my brother. Shout out to Gizmo. Thank you so much for 10 subs. Incredibly generous, man. You've been with us for a long time. I always appreciate your input, Gizmo. I hope you're feeling great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. The last shout out that I want to give is to my friend Ellie. Now, Ellie is my son Hank's best friend. It is my sister-in-law's daughter, stepdaughter. Ellie is fantastic. She's picked up, I was explaining to Ellie the other day, there was a little piano that I was playing, and I was explaining to her like the concept of scales and notes. And she already knows way more than me. So I look like a total idiot. Anyways, I wanted to tell the audience that Ellie got her gray belt today in jiu-jitsu, I believe is what she does. Am I right about that? I think the specific is jiu-jitsu. She's a badass. Gray belt. Officially a gray belt. I think one more belt and she'll be able to throw me around even though I literally weigh like 10 times more than her. So, congratulations to Ellie if you're listening. I think that's fantastic. I can't wait to come watch one of your jiu-jitsu matches. I think it'll be a blast. I don't know, Imaginarium. You don't know about gray belts. Jurtaker, right. Then the military shouldn't be funding the medical shit. Good. See, clear that up. Yep. Great. Taker, I look forward to your defense of R&D, of gain of function, of trans drugs, things like that. Look forward to you talking about that at some point. Anyways, congratulations to Ellie. Thank you so much, Gizmo. Jojo, I hope you're feeling better. I know we're probably not going to see you at Easter tomorrow, at our Easter dinner, and we'll miss you. But I know you'll get better. I know you will. So thank you to everyone. Sorry I didn't get the whole way through that Jordan Peterson Destiny debate. Hopefully we'll get through more of it here in the near future. As far as the guy that called in that wanted to debate, I didn't kick him. I just muted him because he wouldn't let me get the point that I was trying to make out. You can see the bad faith nature of people that want to argue things like climate change. Right. There you go. Taker already, no need to even debate Taker. He defends, at least I'll give him that. He's biting the bullet. Taker's happy that COVID was created and resulted into lockdowns that screwed us all over. There you go. So that debate would be interesting, wouldn't it? Let's find someone to raid and then I'm going to get out of here. Someday I'll learn how to raid people on YouTube too. Wouldn't that be nice? I think I have to sign up for something or... What is this crap? What is this? Go away. What the fuck? Oh, there we go. Okay. Who's on? Oh. If you're feeling adventurous, EOD was on here. Let's rate EOD. He was on my channel, so. Yeah, you can call in to debate climate change, sure. Hopefully you can answer a simple yes/no question. Scraggle Muffin says, "Yo, Rob, my boyfriend thinks you're pretty cool. Sounds like you got a good boyfriend." When? That's a good question. Next I'll be streaming is next Wednesday. So any day I'm streaming and I don't have a guest, if you're just on, I usually stream Wednesday, Thursday, Fridays, some Saturdays around 8 p.m. Eastern. So if you see me streaming and I don't have a guest and you just mention in the chat, hey, you want to talk about climate change? I bet I'll say yes. So next Wednesday would probably work, is the next time I'll be streaming. All right, I hope you all have a fantastic time. We're going to raid EOD. I hope you enjoy that. Sorry I didn't get through all of that today. It's a little bit of a disheveled thing, but I'm going to have a lot of fun tomorrow with my Easter, so it was all worth it. Thanks so much, everyone. As always, have a good one.